Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Planning and Regeneration Committee. Thank you for joining us as we explore why new towns are being proposed for London, how they would work in practice, and what planning policies and governance arrangements may be needed. Before we get started, please may I remind everyone to switch their devices to silent mode and ask that members and guests ensure that their electronic devices are not placed in front of their microphones. Please adjust your microphones so you can be heard clearly and remember to lift them from the base if needed. Members of the public are encouraged to follow @London Assembly on various social media platforms. When using X, please include the hashtag Assembly Planning for this meeting. Before we begin, we have a few items of business to attend to. Can I now ask our committee clerk, Sal Fazal, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare?
I probably don't need to do this, but we're talking about Barking Riverside in this agenda, and I live there, and I pay the dues there, so I'll just put that out there.
Thank you, Assemblymember Boff. Minutes. Can we confirm the minutes of the committee meetings held on 18 November and 8th of December 2025 as correct records? Can we note the completed, closed and ongoing actions arising from the committee's previous meetings and the additional correspondence received? Can we note the action taken by me as chair of the committee under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the committee's report Gridlocked, How Planning Can Ease London's Electricity Constraints? Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations as outlined in the agenda report that formal approval will be sought from the GLA Oversight Committee Chair in consultation with the Deputy Chair and relevant group leads to approve non-routine expenditure of up to £5,000 for a visit to Clamart in France as part of the ongoing investigation into new towns? Following this approval, the Chair of the London Assembly will be requested to approve the principle of foreign travel and sign the necessary travel forms for this visit.
You asked us to do anything there, you're just telling us.
No, just informing you, keeping you abreast. We now move on to our main item of business, a discussion on new towns for London. We've structured our meeting into two panels, and I would like to welcome our guests for the first panel. In the chamber today, we have Dr. Thomas Aubrey, visiting Senior Fellow, the London School of Economics and Political Science, Charlie Berry, Policy Manager at Shelter, Kane Emerson, Head of Housing Research at YIMBY Alliance, and Tom Perry, Director of Urbanism and Landscape Projects at the King's Foundation. Thank you all very much for joining us. The first question is from myself, and I think we'll start with Thomas and go along the line. And it is London a good place for a new town? And what is your assessment of the two sites shortlisted by the New Towns Task Force in London, namely Cruise Hill and Thamesmead?
Hi. Thank you for inviting me today. In terms of new towns, I think the best way to think about it is large-scale urban regeneration or densification in this context. This has obviously been happening across Europe over the last 20, 30 years. So to the extent that there's increasing demand for housing in London, this is absolutely the right way to deliver large amounts of new housing. The thing I would try and emphasise, though, is that when you're thinking about the concept of a new town, it must be fully integrated with transportation. This has been a cardinal error of our whole urban planning environment for the last 50 years. In terms of the sites, one of the things I would just raise, particularly on the Thamesmead site, is that when you're looking at the costs of the absolute costs of infrastructure, sometimes if you're only doing a couple of stations in terms of an extension, you just don't make up commercially viable. So a lot of the larger scale projects you can see across Europe, they often have to go a bit bigger to make those commercially viable. So if you're looking at the Thamesmead piece, actually extending it into Bexley may be actually necessary in order to make that a commercially viable proposition.
Hi, and yes, also thank you very much for the opportunity to address the committee this afternoon. In terms of Shelter's priority for new towns, obviously London is the epicentre of England's housing emergency. Analysis that we put out a couple of months ago showed that 1 in 45 Londoners are homeless, and 199,000 of them are in temporary accommodation. So there absolutely is a huge need for development in London on the scale that new towns can provide. And what new towns offer as well is the opportunity for that development to be public-led, which means that there are opportunities to deliver far more social rent homes than might be possible on other forms of development. And that's really what we want to see from both of the new town sites that have been identified for London. Is we think there's some really good opportunities there for those to be to have a really high percentage of social rent homes, which are the only genuinely affordable type of social housing because the rents are linked to local incomes. And particularly the Enfield site, I know, has already had a very high proportion of social and affordable housing targeted within it. I think what we want to see more broadly from the New Towns programme is that 40% affordable that the government has targeted, we're a little bit concerned that quite quickly seems to have become seen as a kind of ceiling on what you might deliver within new towns, and we're really keen that's not just an ambition, that's achieved and maybe even a minimum, because public-led development offers the opportunity to deliver social rent social rent at a considerable scale.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just to echo some of the comments made by Charlie at Shelter, is that London is the epicentre of England's housing crisis, and London needs new homes at scale. The economic and social ideal of this would be to have new homes in existing neighbourhoods, the places that people already have family, work and social connections. So on Dr. Aubrey's point about making sure that they're well located, I cannot emphasise this enough, because new towns are only a useful tool if they're in well located locations. So as a bit about the housing need across London, so of course the average private rent is over £2,200 a month. You have, as Charlie Berry said, over 140,000 people in temporary accommodation or households in temporary accommodation, and you have 300,000 households on the social housing waiting list. So on the locations of Thamesmead and Cruise Hill, it's vitally important that Thamesmead is well connected, and you have the proposed DLR line extension. It would be great to unpack that a bit in the discussion about land value capture and how we fund this. But there's an absolute need for new homes in London, and the New Towns project is a welcome way to do that.
Good afternoon, everybody. I suppose my starting point would be the legacy that we have in the city. There's an incredible history of new towns and garden settlements in and around London. A huge number of lessons that can be learnt, going back really to the very first, but also the legacy of the urban regeneration projects. I suppose we're sort of in the centre of one here, actually, and what it takes to deliver something of quality in the city. I think that experience of leadership through complex delivery, leadership and the mechanisms required to actually achieve quality, and the mechanisms required to go beyond just pure housing delivery, and what are the bigger outcomes that we can deliver. I live on the edge of the Olympic Park. I think one of the big questions at the beginning of that project was, what can this deliver beyond just the games? That for me is the starting point. You know, what are the outcomes that can be delivered? Can these sites also make the city more resilient? Can they make it bring back nature into the city? You know, can they improve health and well-being? I think there's huge opportunities with the two sites. They're really interesting. Thamesmead, both Thamesmead and Enfield, huge regeneration issues, connectivity issues. I think actually we do our best schemes in this country when we're looking at places that are quite complex and issues that need resolving, rather than when we're given a blank sheet of paper and just a greenfield site. I think we struggle a little bit. There's incredible skills in this city, incredible skills, both public and private sector. I think those are the things that bring people to this country to look at what we have delivered over the last sort of 30, 40, 50 years. And I think we can achieve something pretty special in the two sites that have been chosen.
Thank you all very much for those opening remarks. Assembly Member Garbett.
I'm not sure who to aim this at, but maybe Tom. The YouGov poll shows that 65% of Londoners would, and I quote, support the construction of a new town-sized settlement in areas with significant unmet housing need. So do you think this description matches the two sites that we're talking about, the Cruise Hill and Thamesmead?
For me, Tom.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I'm not sure who was best placed. I listened to your intros, but yeah.
No, I think, there is clear need in London. I think there is clear need in terms of regeneration in terms of those two locations. I think Enfield is really interested. I'm speaking as a planner by background, but you know, there's a whole conversation that has been going on in this country for 30 odd years about Greenbelt and its value. The whole of the country will be looking to what happens in Enfield and what is happening around the edges of London, and what can be delivered. So I think there are exciting opportunities.
Thanks. I can see colleagues have flagged. Yeah, I'll leave it there for the moment and see what else comes out.
Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Perry, you said that we need nature. It was important to bring nature into the city, and yet the Cruise Hill proposal forces nature out of the city. How are those two compatible?
It's a very interesting question. I haven't looked at the proposals in detail. I think there's obviously a long
building on parks.
There's a long way to go.
Yeah, it's building on parks.
Right. I think there are some really interesting schemes where parks have been protected and new open spaces have been created. Foundation worked on a scheme probably 25 years ago for a hospital in Liverpool where to redevelop the hospital it required building on a local park, but that open space was then given back in better quality to what was given before. So I think these things need to be looked at holistically and across a sort of the whole scheme. So I don't know the details, so I wouldn't want to comment on those specifics. But I think that is a challenge, and I think these sites need to give back more than just housing.
Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks. So my question is about how we make new towns a success, and obviously that's been contained in some of your opening remarks. So I'll ask the question again, and if you could cover anything that you haven't necessarily talked about. So what are the conditions that need to be in place to make new towns a success in London, but also how do we define and measure that success? And if anyone has any specific sort of measures or metrics that you think we should be looking at. Does that make sense as a long question? Kane, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I think for this question it's helpful to look at where new towns have been successful and unsuccessful. So I really emphasise the well-connected aspect of new towns. So if you look at a new town failure of planning, you could look at Scamersdale. Scamersdale is supposed to be within a commuting distance of Liverpool. The idea was that the working classes of Liverpool would be moved out from the slums at the time out to Scamersdale. Now, because of the beaching cuts in the 1960s, they cut the Scamersdale train station. So you moved a population of working class people to a new town, and there was one big local employer, and that local employer shut a few years after. So as a result, Scamersdale had persistent unemployment, some of the highest unemployment rates in the country for the longest time, because we created a new town based around one big employer, and there's no connections to any other workplaces. Now, you contrast that with somewhere like Milton Keynes. Milton Keynes is one of the most successful new towns, both in terms of housing supply, so they built at the fastest rate of any new town, and secondly for opportunities for residents. So the average worker in Milton Keynes earns a lot more than the average worker in Scamersdale, and that's because it's well located by car to other places in the Oxford-Cambridge corridor and by train to London. So if you're looking for a metric of how these new towns could be successful, I would imagine you look at commute times. So how quickly can you commute to a place of work or centres of employment?
Yeah, so, I mean, just on that, I suppose that's a condition to be in place, but I suppose, taking from what you said, defining success in the long term would be, are these places where people have employment or access to employment would be one, yeah?
Yes, and sometimes we have this idea of a place can't just be for living, they have to have employment opportunities. Yeah. I think that's certainly a long-term ambition, but in the short and medium term, these places might not have many employment opportunities. So for the resilience of the people living there, it's important that they can get to other
access to employment
locations.
Okay. Thanks. Charlie.
I think one other important thing, thinking about the past experience with new towns, is how quickly they're able to build out. And it's really interesting if you compare the older new towns projects back in the the post-war period with more recent ones. One of the main differences between those is that often, the original new towns often has social rent housing at their heart. They built out quite quickly as well, because obviously then as now there's almost limitless need for social homes, for genuinely affordable social homes, and that means that the town can build out quite quickly, and social rent housing can be the thing that provides the anchor around which all of those other things, the private housing, the businesses and the other kind of aspects of the town can come together, because you've got you can very quickly build that out. And more private-led models often have struggled to build out as quickly because we're more reliant on because you're reliant on private demand to build out. And obviously, I'm sure the committee will be aware at the moment there's currently real challenges around private demand for purchasing new build homes. And so I think that would be one thing that we would say is a good measure. Is in terms of how quickly you can build out, and social rent's a good way to do that. And that requires there to be a public-led model for how you deliver new towns.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Thomas? Sure.
Yeah, I would just emphasise the point that Kane made about infrastructure. And it's not just about transportation, but it's about amenities, it's about green spaces. If you look at the sort of densification across parts of Europe, the reason why that's the way to sort of try and do it within these existing urban environments is that's where the jobs demand is. And so, therefore, that's where you want to have your housing supply. But I think that we have a very bad history in this country over the last 50 years of putting the infrastructure in first. The classic example, I don't know if you've ever been to Northstowe, but this kicked off in about 2006. There's about maybe 1,500 houses, I think, now up and running. But the infrastructure there is appalling. Try and get into Cambridge, it takes a long time. And so you have a situation when do people want to go in and live there if the infrastructure is bad? Whereas if in the Netherlands, the station is there, and then the houses start getting built. And I think that, coming back to your point, in the end, what is most important is that people want to live in these places, but actually the infrastructure becomes an absolutely critical part of why they want to live there.
Thanks. Tom?
I was just going to add, based on our experience, cross-party support for these schemes, leadership and vision. I think that's something that's obviously always played out in terms of the King's developments that he's been involved in. A broad understanding of the existing qualities and challenges that from a community. What are the social, natural, built, economic capital that is already there in the place that can be built upon. And cross-discipline working on all our schemes. I think cross-discipline working and breaking down silos is how we solve the most challenging problems. And just in terms of measures of success, I was just going to flag something which was based on a national park rather than a new town, but it's something I really love. So when the West Midlands was doing a research project about setting up a national park across Birmingham, their measures of success, which I think were really easy for members of the public to follow rather than planners. Can every child see the stars at night? Can they see where the sun rises and sets every day? Can everyone see a tree from their bedroom window? Can you watch tadpoles in the spring and pick apples in the autumn? And does everyone recognise that they are part of this place and value what that means? And they were specific to the natural world rather than a more holistic view, but I think they were very tangible and something that everyone felt that they could own.
Thanks. That's really interesting. And just specifically, you may have already all covered this. Charlie certainly talked about it. But are there any specific housing outcomes that a new town should be achieving, say, in the first 10 years? How would that success look like in those terms?
I will just jump in quickly. Yeah. And from our perspective, there is a real crisis amongst SME builders in this country. I think one of the things that new towns could and should be doing is supporting SME builders build up their base and get on the ladder and grow as businesses. And that has huge impact in terms of local jobs, local skills, local supply chains. So it's something we'd really like to see through the New Towns programme.
Anything else to?
For me and for hundreds of thousands of Londoners, affordability is a key success metric. So the GLA has done some very good data analysis on this, and it shows that for every 1% in increase in housing supply in an area, you get a 2% decrease in rents. So I would like to see that the areas around Cruise Hill and Thamesmead have, if not falling rents, rents that are increasing at a slower pace.
Thanks. Charlie?
I mean, as I've already covered, I think we would really like to see them focused on reducing levels of homelessness and reducing social housing waiting lists. But also one particular area of homelessness I think is relevant to this is obviously a number of London boroughs are now really struggling to find placements for people within the borough, and we're seeing families being pushed further and further out of London by the affordability crisis that there is within London. And what building social rent at scale in sort of new town locations would allow is that when you're placing families, when families finally do get their forever home, that can be within London, and that would be that's so important to make sure that people aren't being pushed out of the city.
Thanks. Thank you. Anything? No, that's fine. Back to you, Chair.
Assembly Member Boff.
Dr. Aubrey, you argued earlier that Thamesmead, which incidentally the development I wholesomely support, but you argued that Thamesmead could one day merge into Bexley, and that should be an aim. If that's the case, how is it a new town rather than just an urban extension?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't really... This concept of new towns and urban extensions, I think they're largely interchangeable. So from that perspective...
They're not, because new towns have a legal definition.
Yeah, but you can, from a development corporation perspective, you could have a development corporation perspective where you're having an extension of a transport link, and you can have multiple settlements along that transportation. So lots of other projects that have been set up. You can look at the Oxford-Cambridge Arc, lots of work down in Bristol. They are looking at transportation arteries and looking at multiple settlements on that. So the point I was just making about Thamesmead, obviously there's been that discussion following the budget, and the question is how can you fund and finance it? This is obviously my background. It may not be possible to fund and finance it using land value capture and the various revenue streams you've got available to you. This is quite a known issue when you're looking at these kinds of challenges. And therefore, one way of trying to ensure that it does get funded and financed and get off the ground is that sometimes you actually have to have a larger bit of infrastructure. So you may want to extend the DLR into Bexley, which would then give you some more settlements down there as well. So when you're just thinking around the costs of, say, doing 2 stations in relation to how much housing density and output you can have, the returns are necessarily lower than if you, say, have 4 or 5 or 6 stations. It just means that your average cost starts to fall down. So it's just one of the mechanics of when you're looking at, the costs and financing of infrastructure.
And to Mr. Emerson, the Mayor has recently been forced by the government to reduce his requirement on affordable housing down to 20%. If you had the choice, would you want more housing or more affordable housing?
Well, I suppose that's a very difficult trade-off to think about. But if you go... So I think the issue that London particularly has is the missing middle. And if you go to somewhere like Camden, in Camden, I believe it's nearly half of all the kids in Camden now go to private school. If you go back to the 1980s, 1990s, that was not the case. Now, why is that? Well, because you have the extremities of you either do social homes or you do very expensive housing. I think it's very important that we build more housing in the middle to relieve pressure on the social housing waiting list, because there are people who are certainly on the waiting list who 20, 30 years ago in London would have been perfectly fine to afford a market rent.
So you think fewer homes or a fewer new build is an acceptable trade-off in order to get affordable homes?
Well, it depends on the margin, and I don't think for London you necessarily have to think of the margin. So there are lots of planning constraints that we could look at before we think about, changing the affordability requirements. So, for example, some of the...
They have been changed.
Sorry?
They have been changed.
Yes, yeah. If you're to look at, if you take the Barnsbury estate in Islington, for example, the Barnsbury estate in Islington had to change some of their affordable housing contributions as a result of second staircase rule, because it reduced the viability of developing that site. If you look at planning height restrictions, if you built to 30 stories, then viability becomes so much easier, and therefore you can meet your affordability requirements. So I think at the margin that's an issue, but for much of London, that's not the rule that I would touch first.
Okay, and trapping more people in leasehold. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just to reassure guests, we will be coming to financing and land value capture in due course. Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you. This follows on nicely. So this is about the 40% affordable, which has been floated. And obviously, in this context, affordable in the Mayor's definition and currently in planning does include things like shared ownership and some other of those kind of intermediate rent, products, as the language that is called. Obviously, these are all homes. Charlie, I might start with you, just because you kind of mentioned this a bit in your beginning. Do you think that 40% affordable, because obviously that's not all going to be social homes, sometimes, only 10% of 40% is social homes. Yeah, what's your take on that? I know you've talked a bit about public-led and being more ambitious, but yeah, just an opportunity to talk about what that might look like.
Yeah, I mean, we would absolutely like to see the new towns be more ambitious. And that's because I've mentioned a couple of times the opportunity for a public-led model. And that really means that if the government, it's not clear exactly how the new towns are going to be delivered at the moment, and that will determine really what is actually viable in terms of the affordable and social component of those homes. What we really want to see is the government use the development corporation model. Specifically because one thing that development corporations will be able to do is to assemble land and to purchase it on a no-scheme principle and disapplying hope value. There were changes in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act a couple of years ago that means that now development corporations and other public bodies, where they're purchasing land for affordable, social and affordable housing, and also I think for health and education purposes, can do so disapplying the hope value to the landowner, and that means that the land component can be so much more affordable. But it's only possible if we use a public-led model, because it has to be done so in the public interest. And so we really think that that's very important to make sure that we can be ambitious with the amount of social rent that there are within new towns. Yeah, I think that's
great. No, that's really positive. I was going to ask you about hope value later, but you've covered it now, which is great. Yeah, I guess if anyone else wanted to come in on this point, I guess it's just this definition of affordable, and as you've described, we need to make sure we've got that social rent built into that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just make one point. I mean, there's also a challenge as how you fund and finance your level of affordable housing. So assuming that you have a development corporation and it's looking to be self-funded over a period of, let's say, 20 or 30 years, the number of social housing you'll be able to have is going to be a function of the economics of the overall plan. Some of the modelling that I've done in other areas, that you can get 35% of affordable housing that's paid for by the various revenue streams, and of that 35%, 70% are social rent and 30% are shared ownership. Obviously, if you start to jack up 35 towards 40, it can make the project less and less viable. So I just wanted to raise that. There's a fundamental economic challenge here. When you start to go above 35%, it does become more challenging to actually ensure these things are self-funded.
Yeah, and I know we're going to come on to funding and governance, but I guess that's what we're trying to explore here. Like, we have a real opportunity here to kind of design this in a way that makes that, maximises that social home, which we've all been talking about, that kind of affordability, and social homes are the most important and are the kind of crux of the housing emergency. Yeah, I'll go back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to come to Dr. Thomas. Before I do that, I just want to go back to Kane, because I really like what you said about the middle, because I think there's two key wickednesses that I think we do inadvertently in housing London. We talk about social housing all the time, forgetting that most of the people who have housing need will never be eligible for social housing. They're just simply not going to get on a council waiting list. We had council sat here a few weeks ago, and they were very careful to tell us that they're now telling people they'll be on waiting lists for anything from 10 to 18 years. So, and that's if you're even eligible in the first place. And to go back to something that Dr. Thomas said about the economic reality of social housing Everybody knows we need it. Everybody knows we want it. But we should talk a bit more about subsidised housing so that people who could afford some level of housing, we can help them as well, so they'll just be stuck in temporary accommodation or no man's land. That's very important to me. So when we talk about the economic realities, Dr. Thomas, of delivering a high level of social housing, the government have set it at 40%. I think in London, in many cases, that might be achievable. Outside London, the land values don't seem to support that. So what kind of modelling and what kind of tactics should, let's assume we're going to have some kind of delivery arm, be doing to make those things viable so we can actually pay to deliver this housing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question to answer, just because each project you look at is entirely different. The infrastructure costs are very different. The land remediation costs are very different. Some require tunnelling, some don't. And so, you know, each project, when you have to look at it, you've got to look at all your costs, and then you look at all the different revenue streams you've got, of which there are several. And really what falls out of that is the extent that, you know, as I said, generally, typically, I've started off around a 35% target. That came out of work I did for the National Infrastructure Commission on the Oxford to Cambridge Arc. It's possible that you can have higher levels, but until you've kind of gone through, you know, all of the costs and revenues, you don't really know where this falls out, assuming these things are going to be self-funding. Now, the government, I don't think to date, have said there's any extra funding for new towns. We certainly know from the New Towns experience here that they have been self-funding, and certainly looking at most of the European projects, these are self-funding. So I think we should be thinking about the future of these new towns as being self-funding. But I think each, you know, project will look different, and where you've got less, you know, if the costs of infrastructure are going to be lower and you've got reasonably high density areas which are already well connected, you will be able to have much higher rates of affordable housing. But unfortunately, it just comes back to that, you know, the economics of the overall project in the end.
So, Charlie, take into account that you would like to see higher levels of social rent in particular. Do you think the government should just pay? Are you suggesting? I am suggesting that they should just pay. They're going to have to pay. They're going to have to give subsidy to make that happen.
Well, there is going to be. We do need to see an ambitious level of grant from the government. We know that what's been announced in terms of the Social and Affordable Homes programme is meant to cover about 18,000 social rent homes a year for the next 10 years if you kind of average it out. And we think to make, and so we need to see money more than that. We know that to meet the sort of backlog of housing need that we have for social housing, we need 90,000 a year for 10 years. So we're going to need to see more investment. But the government could be doing specific things to enable new town development corporations to access the financing they need. Particularly, I mean, the original new towns relied on long-term, low-interest public loans. That was really a really important part of their financing. Modern new towns also need to be able to access private financing as well, and they need to be able to flexibly refinance through time. And they also need to be able to hold on to their assets and own their assets over time so that they can grow the proportion, so that they can grow and build new social housing as the project goes along. And there are actually opportunities with new towns to innovate in the ways that they're financed. I think we might come on later a bit more to the detail on financing of them. But there are really interesting things you could do in a new town. Particularly, you could look at alternatives to council tax. For example, you could look at split rate. You could look at land value taxation. You could look at a proportional property tax. Fairer ways to finance those new towns. And if the New Town Development Corporation is able to own a lot of the assets of the new town, then it can grow over time in line with what housing need there is for the town itself.
Charlie, just purely, you might not be able to answer this because I'm going to ask you a purely political question, as it were. Do you think that a given government could sell a different taxing regime just because you're in a new town? So I live in Essex, I'm paying council tax, you live in Thamesmead by the water or whatever they're going to call it, and you don't, you pay some. Do you think that's possible?
Well, it's a good question, but I'd say council tax isn't a universally beloved tax.
That
really
is true. That is true.
And it would be a good way to incentivise people to move to new towns if you could if you could offer a fairer taxation system for the residents, then that would be a way to ensure that they do build out faster and that they're popular places to live.
That's a fair comment. Council tax is not loved. Go ahead, Kane.
Just to come in on the social housing component of new town. So I think social housing is a very important component of any new town. If you look at the success of Barking and Dagenham in the past 12 years on their waiting list, so Barking and Dagenham have halved their waiting list from over 4,000 households to just over 2,000. And that's simply because they built a lot more and they did think about a cross-subsidy model of where they could build private development and get lots of Section 106 affordable housing from that.
Okay, that's again back to the doctor. Where are the Treasury in supporting what goes on for new towns? Because I sit on a different committee that's been looking at this, and I feel an absence of the Treasury. For instance, will the Treasury help with getting access to patient capital? What have they said about this? That surely would make a new town far more viable. But in their defence, that will add to our national borrowing, wouldn't it? That we're in a different situation than we were the first time around when we tried new towns. So where are the Treasury, and what innovations could they be thinking about in order to get money to this? And one last question as well. Why aren't we building the infrastructure first? Why aren't we putting down the sewers, the railway track, the bridge, the road first? You seem to suggest that that is something we're quite poor at as a nation. Is that a fair assumption?
That's a great question about where are HMT at the moment. It's a question I often ask as well. I'm not sure I can give you much insight into what they're saying, but I think that there's a couple of things I would note. The UK has deviated from internationally recognised accounting standards, and so in the Netherlands, what happens is you can set up something like a new town development corporation. You can issue that debt, and as long as that debt's paid back by market sources, it's considered what we call off-balance sheet for the fiscal rules. And so the Dutch have got about a third more infrastructure stock as a percentage of GDP than the UK. And the reason is because they've got about 80% of their GDP in debt, which is funded basically by the private sector, so it doesn't require any taxpayers' revenue. And that mechanism has been tried and tested. And ironically, actually, that's kind of what the Victorians did to build our infrastructure here. But this deviation means that actually the Victorians couldn't build all the infrastructure we had today because it's considered to be on balance sheet. So I think that we've almost become an international accounting pariah, I would say, from the financial markets perspective. So that is a big issue, I would say. At some stage, a sensible government will have to look at this and think, why are we actually constraining our ability for profitable projects to get off the ground? I think that if you're going to finance this through the gilt market, I think we would have major issues with yields blowing out, which would increase the cost of borrowing. So obviously, if you go back to the post-war new towns, they were funded by the Public Works Loan Board, and that was funded by increased gilts issuance. That made sense after the war just because the capital was scarce. Capital is not scarce today. The capital is very, very abundant. What we don't have are these good quality projects that have a positive return that would then allow those projects to actually access the capital market directly. I mean, there are discussions taking place, I'm sure, about the specific issue. But at the moment, the way the Treasury looks at it, it means it would become, on balance sheet. Their proposal is this sort of public-private partnership, which it doesn't really scale particularly well, I have to say. It could work for maybe a 5,000 unit development, but if you're looking at something that's 30, 40, 50,000 plus, a DLR extension, this PPP isn't going to work particularly well. I mean, if you look at the Lower Thames tunnel. That's a PPP project, but that requires about 3 billion of taxpayers' money to get off the ground. Whereas if we were in continental Europe, if you think about the Øresund Bridge between Denmark and Sweden, that was a public corporation body that issued debt and had zero cost to the taxpayer. So we're missing quite a pretty important trick, I have to say.
Okay. Chair.
Assemblymember Boff.
Miss Berry, you revealed a very great secret that council tax is not loved. I don't know of many taxes that are actually loved, to be fair. But one thing you did say is enhanced grant rates should be given to London. How do you feel taxpayers in places like Manchester and Salford would feel about subsidising developments in London?
I mean, it's a good question. I suppose thinking about new towns specifically, there are opportunities to kind of reduce that need for, as I said, for central government to provide quite so much of the grant funding like you do through kind of conventional social housing delivery, because new town development corporations are able to own and manage the assets of the town over time and reinvest them for the benefits of the local community.
That I've not got an issue with. It's about these enhanced grants that you're saying expecting to receive, because they've got to come from somewhere, and that will be the rest of the UK.
Well, I suppose I was talking more generally about the need for there to be, rather than specifically about the grant rate, more generally for there to be, for us, we need to see more investment than has already been set out in the social and affordable homes programme. Grant rates obviously have to be have to work for the local area where things are going to be built. But yeah, I suppose I meant more generally. We do need to see additional investment on top of what's already been proposed.
Thank you. And Mr. Emerson, you said that we should follow the example of Barking and Dagenham in cutting waiting lists. Should we follow their example in terms of quality of build?
So, of course, Barking and Dagenham's development mostly happened during a period where there were significant building regulatory failures in Britain. And I suppose we can see that throughout history of building. If you have a settlement that was mostly built during the 1960s within a short period.
No, I'm talking about balconies dropping off an estate that was built only 5 years ago, and a tower block being built with unsafe electricity systems now.
Yeah, which is appalling, yeah.
So their example is not so great, is it?
Well, I was making more the point about the land value capture and reducing waiting lists on council for council homes, rather than the quality of build.
Thank you.
And Thomas from LSE, you said about the analysis you'd done on the Oxford-Cambridge arc. Can I just ask when that analysis was done and whether you think that analysis holds true for London?
As I said, it's really hard to, because when you have to look at the projects for that, we obviously had to get all of the cost estimates that were done by Arup for all the different infrastructure components. In the end, when you're looking at these different sites, it will be very project specific and those costs. I mean, I would say absolutely you'd definitely be able to get 35% social housing. You might be able to get more, but just don't know until you look at the actual costs. But when I've modelled this for another, I did a bit of work with Crossrail 2 team a few years ago when it existed, and I think we were looking at 70% social rent and 30% share ownership, and I think it was about a 35% affordable housing, because there were about 200,000 units across that project. So, I think that when you look down into the individual projects, unfortunately, it's just very hard to generalise about these things. Sorry, it's not a very good answer, but it's just the reality.
No, thank you for it. And I'll come to Kane now, and then anyone else who wants to chip in, please do. What do you think the delivery vehicle and governance structure should be for the London new towns?
So ideally, you would have a development corporation that can oversee because new towns are such a big project, and there'll be lots of lots of planning questions that you'd like to integrate and work on a kind of cross-disciplinary basis, as mentioned by Tom. There's also the live question that we haven't touched on, but we're talking about social housing quite a lot. And there is the question of how social home allocations will happen. Because obviously there's only 2 proposed new towns that are urban extensions to London. So are the benefits localised to those local boroughs who get to allocate those homes, or do different boroughs get a different share? So a development corporation, a mayoral or a national development corporation would be able to help tackle some of those questions.
And do you have a view on how you think allocations should work for them?
I don't have a particularly strong view on this, but I suppose the question of overall London's housing need is so great that I do think it would be fair for different boroughs to get some share of the new social homes. And you can kind of see that in kind of everyday opinions of ordinary people. Do they identify with living in Haringey particularly strongly? Possibly, but they're more likely to say that they're a Londoner, so new homes in London, they should maybe get to have a say in whether they get it or not.
And one of the reasons I ask is because last week we did a visit to Thamesmead, had a really good look at the site, chatted to Peabody and TfL and other stakeholders. And one of the questions was, in a site like Thamesmead, is a development corporation necessary, or does it potentially slow everything down, given that Peabody already own pretty much all the land there? They have a supportive council. It's not a particularly partisan issue. Would we be at risk of actually slowing down that site in particular if we did go down the development corporation model?
I suppose I can't recall the local authority that Thamesmead is in, but it really depends on the local authority and whether they have capacity to oversee a huge new town project, and if they have any central government funding for additional planning officers. Also on that, we've discussed a lot about viability and how many social homes that you can get out of these new towns. A development corporation might be able to take a more objective view on trade-offs than a local authority that has to think about established local groups that might not like to see too big a development when the rest of London might like to see more homes because of the acute housing need.
Did anyone else want to come in on governance structure or delivery model?
I suppose all I would say is there's a track record in London for development corporations, a very recent track record, and I suppose the benefits of that, that's something that can obviously be looked into, and the transition, I think, has also been really important, certainly with LLDC that I know of. You had 4 London authorities that had planning responsibility, and LLDC took that planning responsibility for a certain number of years and has now transitioned back. So I think huge numbers of lessons learned as to whether it's right. It might, as you say, it might be right for one but not the other. But I think that impact on local authorities as well is a really critical issue. I think it's Greenwich, isn't it, for Thamesmead? Greenwich has got quite a lot of other stuff going on in terms of development. There's the peninsula, which is 20-odd thousand homes. There's however many other developments for an overstretched authority. So they will need support.
Yeah, Ken.
Sorry, just to come back. So I co-authored a paper on Oxford-Cambridge corridor that was published last week that looked at the governance structures, and we proposed a development corporation for the entirety of the area stretching from Oxford to Cambridge. The rationale was local authority planning capacity is quite limited, but one convincing rationale is that if you look at countries like Germany that build infrastructure at a much cheaper or lower cost than Britain, one of the reasons for that is that they tend to have projects that roll over year on year. So you might upgrade one railway line and then that same team then goes and does a second railway line. So if we're looking at a mass new towns project across Britain, it would be beneficial to have one team that builds up expertise in Thamesmead and Cruise Hill, and then go on once the 10 new towns are finished by the government, then move on to another new town, rather than building up lots of expertise in Greenwich Council that is then wasted.
Thank you very much for that. I think, the Milton Keynes Development Corporation was set up in 6 weeks, so I think maybe we can learn historically from what's been done in terms of speed of delivery. Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you. Charlie, I know we've talked a bit about the public land and some of the other bits, but just to push a bit more in this kind of governance section. So the Shelter report says that private-led model or reliance on mechanisms like Section 106 agreements would be insufficient to deliver the new towns. Can you just explain why you think, it's so important for them to be orchestrated around a kind of public model, and anything you wanted to add on that bit? Thanks.
Thanks. I mean, a lot of the benefits of the Development Corporation model have just been discussed, really. In addition to the kind of governance aspects that we've heard about, the fact that there's the ability to have a kind of single point of responsibility for the development, and to take on some of the planning responsibilities as well, which can ensure that new towns have a good, a well-designed and coherent as spaces. Hope value disapplication really is really important, especially if we want to put social housing at the heart of new towns, and that will need a public-led model, that will need a development corporation model. And there are some other benefits to that model as well, that offer the opportunity to move beyond some of the current sort of challenges that we see in the planning system. Particularly, we think that the sort of Section 106 system will really is not probably not the right model for delivering social and affordable housing within new towns, or certainly has some challenges associated with it, particularly because of the challenge of build out rates, really. And new towns are an opportunity to look at a planning system that has clearer sort of roles and responsibilities. We've published in the past about planning contracts as a model where there's a relationship between the DevCo and the builders that are and the developer on site, with clear timelines for delivery. And also because the DevCo owns the land, they can set clear expectations around what the social and affordable housing components will be that sit within that, and aren't subject to the same sort of levels of renegotiation that we see through Section 106 agreements. And there could be opportunities for other forms of delivery too. So I think in that report we had a whole section about the opportunities for community land trusts to be involved in new town delivery. Having a development corporation who's able to assemble the land much cheaper than a private-led model could means they can identify sites that are suitable for community land trusts, which in turn are able to deliver social and affordable housing at fairly high levels, and with local community involvement to make sure that development meets the needs of local people.
Great, thank you. I know we've got some other questions related to that, but that was really helpful in Section 106. Thank you.
Assemblymember Boff.
In any local governance model, you've got to talk about local consultation, local consent. When a development corporation's been set up with the sole purpose of developing an area, how open are they going to be to local residents' concerns about things like building on the green belt? Yeah, thank you.
I'll just say one point about the development corporation model is that it can be successful if the infrastructure is put in. And one of the big challenges, if you go back and look at resistance to large-scale projects, is there's been no benefit for the existing residents. There's been no additional amenities. There's been no additional transportation infrastructure. So I think that the approach going in, if you are a development corporation with a very robust transport infrastructure, with new green spaces, with new areas that actually can benefit existing residents, I think that does change the way that we've been approaching a certain development. And look, I think with Greenbelt, there are parts of Greenbelt in London which, particularly below the M25, which are not particularly pretty. And so I think there's less resistance, I think, from local communities to build on those areas. But sure, where there are very green places, then I think that's going to always be an issue. But I would just come back to this point about infrastructure. Unless we're doing infrastructure-led development, this will not work.
Isn't your argument saying to private owners of Greenbelt, make your land look less pretty and you're more likely to develop it?
Well, I mean, the Labour government has introduced this kind of concept of the grey belt. And to what extent you think that...
Surprisingly, that's not a concept that I am sympathetic to.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when across Rail 2 were looking at this, there were certain areas of the green belt that looked like industrial land. I mean, there wasn't fields. So, yeah, I get there's maybe a grey area here, but I think when you're looking at certain areas that are allocated, residents do have a slightly different view, particularly if you're wanting to get rid of a park or a green field with trees, etc.
Like Cruise Hill. Yeah, like Cruise Hill. Cruise Hill is a park.
Yeah, as I said, it's people have different perceptions of these things, but I wouldn't be so dogmatic about the green belt. But of course, local residents don't generally like losing green spaces. But again, if you're going in selling something to local residents that's going to be benefiting them, as opposed to it's just lots more houses, the same existing streets, the existing GP surgeries, the same schools, then people get very frustrated.
And in the case of the LLDC, there was an enormous democratic deficit. There were no elections to the LLDC. That's why we've got such bloody awful cycling infrastructure over there, even though residents complained about it beforehand.
I spend my entire life cycling around.
And it's really, really badly planned,
fantastic.
bearing in mind it's only been put up less than 20 years ago.
We will disagree on that one. I would just to say something on infrastructure, and I would agree to a large extent. We are not very good in this country in putting in infrastructure early. I was at a scheme which is well worth taking a look at. Actually, it's just outside the M25, but it's called Bucklers Park in Crowthorne. I was there on Monday. They put in all the infrastructure early on that you have to put in, which is roads, drainage. They created the open spaces. They protected existing open spaces. It's such good quality, and it's very early being adopted by both the community who are moving in and communities who are existing and adjacent to the place. In part, that I think a large part that is just because of the quality. So, drainage areas are play areas. There were kids coming out of school and going straight into the drainage system to go over stepping. I mean, it was flooding, and they were going over stepping stones, and there were no, barriers to stop them doing that. And it was wonderful to see. I would say the infrastructure they put in was the same as most sites have to put in, and I don't know enough about the site to know whether that was just because the developer cared or because the local authority was particularly strong and enforced it, or whether it was a bit of a public-private sort of partnership. I don't quite know the background to it, but it does happen in this country. We are capable of doing it. It just doesn't happen all the time, and it has to happen on the new towns.
Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
Just to quickly go back to governance structures, because I want to know how new towns should be financed. If we're talking about development corporations, why hasn't the mayor done it? He has all the powers to do it. These sites are both inside London. They're meant to be self-financing. He actually has money because he could have used affordable housing money. Tell me if I'm wrong, please, Doctor. Why hasn't the mayor done this?
I don't know why he hasn't done it.
Well, that's a direct answer. Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely.
On self-financing, it would be helpful if mayors had more powers, such as you see the successful example of the Battersea Power Station redevelopment, which you could almost think of a new town within London. the Mayor was given powers to retain business rates uplift on that, and that fully funded the Northern Line extension. You also see similar powers that were given for the Elizabeth Line creation, where up to a third of it was funded by land value capture. If the Mayor had more powers to do some land value capture without asking Treasury, I think that would be helpful.
I think the Mayor can have business rates anyway, because the year before last, I remember he had over £500 million that he magically had added to his budget. I don't say it as a challenge, but I think he has those powers. And I only say that because I am a fan of the Development Corporation, because I think it puts a certain set of people in charge, and if it happens, they get a pat on the back, and if it doesn't, we know who to go and have a stiff conversation with. It's a committee that doesn't deliver anything. But just to come back to Tom and the doctor, and anybody else but Tom and Dr. Verse, how are these things going to be financed? I'm going to come to you, Charlie, because I'm very interested in how we pay for social and affordable housing, because I think it's the backbone of any neighbourhood, but you do have to find a way to pay for it. It can't just magically turn up. So you talked to us, Doctor, about taking things off balance sheet. Is there anything else significant that the government can do, even if it has to do especially just for new towns?
I mean, there's a tried and tested way of doing this across Europe. So you create a public corporation body, and you go to the capital markets and you issue debt. And the important thing is you'll issue long maturity debt, 20, 30 years, because obviously the challenge when you're building a new project is you have short-term costs and your income only starts coming in years 4, 5 and 6, etc. So that maturity transformation is exactly what the capital markets does extremely well. So in theory, there's nothing stopping that happening today. The challenge, of course, is that, let's say you had a development corporation in London for the Thames Mead project and the DLR extension. It could get out there, issue debt. Investors would love to invest in this. It would probably price at about 100 basis points above gilts. There's probably about a 30 billion demand for these kinds of projects each year from investors. There's no shortage of capital. We just need, the projects to come through. I think that if you did put the project in front of the Treasury and demonstrate to them that, look, we can self-fund this transformation of these areas, I think they'd be very interested in listening to what you have to tell them, and maybe that would change their mind around how they would account for that debt. But I think the more that, combined authorities are developing their integrated plans and looking to self-fund them, it's a much better conversation if you're in the Treasury to have than a combined authority or the GLA coming to the Treasury saying, can you give me 10 billion for this project? The Treasury would likely to say, no, go away. So I think there's an element of both sides here that need to come to an arrangement where, this is the logic of devolution, where, we can expect bodies, Oxford, Cambridge, Bristol, London, etc., coming up with these good quality plans. They've thought about the financing and the funding, and then they go into the Treasury to ensure that they get buy-in for it. Because in the end, the Treasury is going to have to say yes somewhere on the line, and that's right, because what we don't want to happen is poor quality projects that might default. Now, in places like London, Oxford, Cambridge, Bristol, the demand for housing is very high, and so an investor that's coming in is really betting on future employment growth in those areas. They look pretty good. I mean, when Cambridge issued its own bonds, it had a better credit rating than the United Kingdom sovereign. So the money is there. I think it's just coming up with these integrated plans and demonstrating over a long period of time that you actually have the cash flows to actually pay back the bondholders.
And Charlie, is there anything in particular that you think could happen to focus some money on building social, and I'm going to say social rent, not just affordable, right down. Is there anything in particular you think could happen that should be built in from the very beginning to deliver that type of housing?
I mean, I think as it really comes back to, as I said, like the means of land value capture that you have within new towns. So the crucial thing really is going to be making sure that the land is at the right price to make social rent viable through hope value disapplication, and then as the new town and then the new town development corporation can absolutely use grant money, but can also use its own resources to to fund the building of social housing.
Shouldn't that be simple if the land's in public ownership? The GLA, the mayor, has tons of land. So listening to you, unless I'm simplifying, doesn't that eliminate one of his big challenges in that he can control the hope value because it's only him who's hoping?
I mean, absolutely, yeah. We want to see public land used as far as possible for public benefit, and social rent housing is absolutely, one of the most important public benefits there can be. I think when it comes to the sites I don't know the specifics, I have to say, of how. I think at Enfield a lot of it already is public land. Thamesmead is obviously owned by Peabody, and it's going to depend on the model that's pursued. But yeah, absolutely, it should really be within where land is already in public ownership. That should make social rent much more viable.
And Kane, just to quickly go back to this thing about allocations, one of the challenges of any housing is you build in a local area, but really we should be building for London. So am I hearing you right when you say that, imagine we built Thamesmead, it's fine. Should all London boroughs get some kind of allocation to that area? Is that what you're saying? Should it be built for London, in simple terms?
Yeah, I suppose that's an overarching political question to consider, but I don't see why, if we're depending on 2 new towns to deliver most of London's housing, that those benefits should be entirely localised when, you have some people in real housing need in Hackney or Newham or Wandsworth.
I happen to agree. That's why I asked the question, because I think sometimes you're building for a community that doesn't yet exist, so it can't represent itself. It can't say we desperately need this.
But sorry, just also to add on that, we do have to balance incentives of local communities. So if you look at, for example, estate renewal in London has been completely successful in terms of getting democratic mandates to do it, and that's because the residents of those estates benefit the most from the disruption. So it's important to make sure that local residents see some benefit in it for them.
Yeah, I'll fight. There's a tension though between local residents and Londoners, and I suppose in a brand new town as opposed to an urban extension. And for me, I can see, as the doctor said, they are interchangeable terms. I can see that it technically may be easier for a brand new conurbation that people don't feel they own the area because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But okay, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. We spoke a bit about land value capture. I just wondered how you think land value capture should be used within the new towns.
So I look at Dr. Aubrey because he's the leading expert on development corporation financing. There are a few methods of how you can do this. So Charlie touched on the CPO powers that government can utilise, where you you can purchase land, compulsory purchase land without the hope value. So the hope value being the value of the land with residential planning permission. So you can buy existing use value, so whether that's as a greenfield, as agricultural use, or as industrial use, and those land values are much cheaper. So if you look at an acre of industrial land, it'll be a quarter of the price of residential land, and by buying it at that price and then developing it, applying planning permission, you get extraordinary increases in the value of the land. So you can sell some market development and then pay for your infrastructure and your social homes. I touched earlier on Battersea. So Battersea Power Station, you had the Northern Line extension, which costs around £1 billion. That was entirely privately financed. How was that done? Well, so you had contributions from Lambeth and Wandsworth that were collected through SIL and Section 106 that helped contribute, and then you also had business rates retention. So how business rates retention works is that any uplift on business rates in the area, so any new business activity, the development corporation or the mayor would get to keep, and what happens there is that you will borrow against future earnings. So you will take a loan from the private market, and they are depending on you to receive enough business rates uplift over 30 years. Business London propose a council tax version of this, where you get a uplift in council taxes and you allow the local authority or the Metro Mayor or Mayor of London to retain. There's a political question on that where you basically might keep some of the council tax receipts from new areas, and therefore local authorities don't get it for their services. So that is a difficult political question. But there are lots of tax incremental financing methods that you can think about.
I think the important point I think kind of Kane was making is that it's not just sort of one mechanism. It's you need to think about broader revenue streams. It's not just about one thing. So I think when you're looking at any project, you're going to have different revenue streams. Potentially the most important one is going to be on land that doesn't have planning permission, which you can obviously use Section 190 in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. If land already has planning permission, you can use 106 and SIL. Obviously, to get far less increase in that. Business rates, both the supplement and also if you're creating new areas, certainly could be a discussion around allocating any new business rates to that project as well. I'm a bit sceptical of the council tax argument. I think if you spend any time looking at local government finances, it's not very pretty, given the cuts we've had over the last 15 years and the increasing liabilities that local authorities have. So I think if you're an investor looking at this and you need to put council tax in to make it, work, I as an investor would be concerned because how real is that going to be given the pressure on council tax itself? But I think it's important to ensure that you look at all the revenue streams. There's lots of jargon, unfortunately, in this world. People come up with clever acronyms like TIF this and TIF that, or I'm doing certain kinds of projects, but that ends up just focusing on one revenue stream, and that's just not going to make your projects viable. So really the lists that Kane had, I think, are important. Business rates, acquiring land without planning permission using Section 190, and where there is planning permission using existing 106 and SIL.
And just in terms of both finance and delivery, how important do you think it is for there to be a single landowner for new towns? Obviously, there are slight benefits probably in the London new towns compared to the national ones in terms of land ownership, with Peabody owning a lot of Thames Mead. I think there's a bit more of a assembly piece to do in Cruise Hill, but obviously the council do own quite a bit there. So yeah, how important is that sole landowner in your view in terms of bringing forward new towns?
I'll just say one quick point. Obviously, it makes it easier if you're dealing with one landowner. But in the end, as long as the development corporation has made it very clear to the multiple landowners what price it's going to acquire the land at as a commercial transaction based on using the threat of Section 190, that shouldn't necessarily be an issue. But it does make it faster if you've got a single landowner.
Just from a sort of design perspective, I suppose it helps. But there are, and going back to that point about leadership and vision, it helps if there is one person or one entity with that leadership. But there are plenty of mechanisms that we've seen used throughout London, design codes, master plans, etc., that can help deliver quality with multiple landowners. It is much more complicated, though.
So I think that there's a tension on build-out rates plus long-term stewardship. So if you have a single landowner, then therefore their build-out rate might be much slower, particularly if they're a private developer, because they know that if they build too many homes at once, prices go down, which is kind of the whole point of YIMBYism. But also with single landowners, you do get long-term stewardship, and that can be incredibly beneficial for the area in the long term. So if you look at a development like Poundbury that was developed by the Duchy of Cornwall, the social tenants in the Poundbury estate rent from the Guinness Trust, and the Guinness Trust have over 1 million properties nationwide, and it's Poundbury that actually has the highest satisfaction rate from those residents because the area is very well maintained. Northstowe was mentioned earlier, the urban extension in Cambridge. To contrast against that, there is Eddington, which was developed by the University of Cambridge, and that's a much nicer development, much prettier. It's very close to the town. It's well connected, so having a single landowner was beneficial there because that single landowner put lots of value into it because they knew that long term it would be better for them. On build-out rates, though, it is always helpful to split up sites to ensure that each kind of player in the market are trying to get their value out of the site quickly and therefore build up much faster rate.
Sorry, just to quickly jump in on Northstowe and Eddington and Poundbury. One thing that they both did was an initial first phase to set the market effectively, to test their models, to test their delivery models, the financing, the price points for homes, and learn lessons from those initial first phases. Eddington did it as well, but they both had a long-term stewardship model from an individual landowner.
And I'm as guilty as anyone on this, but just to remind Assembly members, we are a bit pressed for time. Assembly Member Boff.
You've already mentioned design codes, Mr. Perry. What should they be?
What should they be for new towns? Well, I think we've moved away as a country, hopefully, from the sort of requirement for every local authority to have a design code. I think for me, the critical thing is engage. I mean, we've heard how complex these projects are. The critical thing is therefore what is the ambition, what is the level of ambition, and how do we communicate that with communities who are involved in these places, and then how do we sort of ratify those commitments. So if the commitments are around the quality of the place or specific infrastructure that's going in, what are the tools that we have to ensure that those things actually happen? London's got a great track record in terms of design review panels. Most authorities have them. Most development corporations set up their own as well. Community design review panels as well are also really useful. Design codes.
I get the value of design codes. You don't have to sell the principle of design codes to me. It's what should they be? In a new town, should there be certain principles? As what we're calling a new town here.
Yes, I would. I mean, it sort of depends what level you take them to. Some design codes go down to the colour of a door, and some are about principles and how do buildings relate to each other. And then you let individual architects. King's Cross is a great example. Individual architects come in, take a plot. They have some principles they are working to, but essentially can use their own creativity.
No overarching principles for the development as a whole.
Yes.
There should be overarching principles.
Yes, I would completely agree with that.
I was just trying to get an idea of what they might be.
Oh, what they might be?
Yeah.
Well, I think, and again, that's part of the engagement conversation, I think, because there are trade-offs that are going to have to happen. There are priorities. There are things around, style and character. I don't know what is the character for the extension and regeneration of Thamesmead. Thamesmead has a very unique character. Is that something that's going to be reflected? Is that something that's going to evolve over time? Personally, from our perspective, I think it's important that we listen to people in terms of what they want.
I get what you mean, but we've had quite a long conversation about the problems that these developments are aimed to fix. Number of homes. We've talked about density. Should density be one of those principles?
Yes.
And what about the proportion of family housing?
Proportion of family housing, I wouldn't typically set it out in a design code, but I think it's an important aspect that needs to be agreed before. The mix of housing and the tenures is important that that's set.
One of the problems London's got, 300,000 kids growing up in overcrowded conditions, and we're just dropping the number of family-sized homes we're building. Surely that's an ambition that we could meet with new towns.
Yes.
one of the original aims of the new town, of course, in 1946, when the New Towns programme was developed, it was developed alongside the Green Belt programme, because it was viewed at the time that Greenland was very important to these developments. Are they going to continue to be important, or is housing going to force everything out?
I think that's an individual debate for each of the new towns.
You do?
Yes.
So it wouldn't bother you if there was no green?
No, at the beginning I said...
that's why I'm asking you.
At the beginning I said, from my perspective, there should be a balance between natural and built environment.
Yeah.
That can be delivered in different ways in different sites.
Dr. Aubrey, have you got an idea of what design principles should be core? I mean, or are we just saying it's a free-for-all, whichever design principles they come up with?
It's not my area. I'm very much focused on the funding and financing side.
Ms. Berry, what do you think about design principles that incorporates a high proportion of family-sized homes?
Well, we absolutely need to see new towns meeting local housing need, and as you say, there is a need for family-sized homes in London, as there is a need for accessible and adaptable homes for an ageing population as well. And yeah, this is one of the advantages of the new towns model, is that can be set at the outset of the new town as an intention for how the development is going to meet those needs.
Thank you. And Mr. Emerson, if local consultation revealed that local residents were generally against tall buildings being built in the new town, what would the response be?
Well, I think it's very context dependent. So I think Thamesmead, for example, as a site, could do tall buildings.
No, I'm talking about in response to what local residents may unequivocally say.
We will be having a question about consultation on the next question.
Are we really? Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to trample. Sorry. Okay, let that question be asked, and I might come back in. Sorry about
Assemblyman
that. I apologise.
That's all right, don't worry. I know it's hard for us all to it's all interlinked, isn't it? Yeah, so my question is about how should Londoners be consulted about the new town? So a bit of a zoom back. I don't know who wants to respond on that, about, just how people should be consulted, who we need to be consulting and listening to. Has anyone got any thoughts on that? Great, go for it.
I'll just chip in. I suppose our approach has always, from an organisational perspective, has always been around co-design and co-creation, engaging early and throughout the course of a project, and that goes beyond when you've got stuff built, but that's into the management and ownership of a place as well, and long-term stewardship. It's quite interesting, I suppose, in the London context, because as we've discussed, these are London-wide issues, and this is a London-wide conversation, really, when you think about Greenbelt or you think about affordable housing and who gets that affordable housing. So that's possibly the challenge with these sites, is how do you engage the whole of London in a conversation, but also work with the people who are going to be directly affected on a day-to-day basis, who might be losing an open space but might be gaining something else. I don't know. I suppose I would always advocate for more meaningful engagement than just coming up with a plan, turning up in a village hall and showing something, and actually involving people in the process meaningfully. I think that's incredibly important as well when you look at the challenges that we're going to face delivering these things. Really complex issues. They are best solved with the expertise of local people and a myriad of technical expertise as well.
Yeah, I think you've summarised a lot of really complex issues, because I think that's what we're kind of getting at, because obviously a lot of the time if you've got a population, it's who's benefiting and who you're listening to within the development of something like this. But I guess that's, it's a whole nother topic for us. We could have spent hours thinking about that. But do you want to come back in, or if anyone's got...
I would just say, I suppose from our experience, and we sort of pioneered a co-design process in the UK called Inquiry by Design. That is a process to engage everyone with an interest in a site, whether you live next door to it or whether you sort of live the other side of town. and giving everyone an equal voice, but having respect, obviously, for people who have more directly impacted by it. So I think they're going to need, incredible amounts of engagement. Both of them are, and proper engagement plans put in place, and it needs to be done creatively and sensitively, because people's livelihoods are wrapped up in those places. But there's also huge opportunities for communities, and I think that I would always advocate for approaching them in a positive light, engagement in a positive light as well, about not just the constraints or the challenges and then designing around those constraints, but actually what are the opportunities that these places present.
Yeah, I think that's really strong. Does anyone else got anything to add? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'd just like to emphasise the point that Tom's just made, but particularly when you're thinking through your infrastructure planning, there's no point just creating an infrastructure plan and then going to local residents saying, this is what we think. If you haven't looked at their existing challenges and the concerns they already have, it's likely your infrastructure plan is going to be poor, and therefore it's going to be resisted. So I just really want to emphasise that point, is that many parts of London have got very poor infrastructure. I mean, there are many parts that have got fantastic infrastructure, but particularly where we're looking at these two areas, you've got to make sure you get this infrastructure piece right up front. There's got to be benefit for existing local residents in the area, as well as the new residents that are going to be living there.
Yeah, it feels like it should be happening now, because we're all talking about this, aren't we, conceptually, without the people who are going to be most impacted in the room. So, yeah, really heard that loudly. Thank you, Chair.
Assemblymember Baker.
Hi. So my question is to Charlie specifically about community-led housing models. So Shelter has specifically asked that to be part of, all developments, within developments. What benefits would that bring to new towns specifically in London?
Well, I think the answer here really relates quite a lot to what we've just been discussing in terms of the involvement of the local community as well, because if community land trusts and other forms of community-led housing are given a role within development in taking on specific sites, then obviously that's giving a very direct involvement of the local community in how that site, in what is delivered on that site, and also in the long-term governance of the site as well. Like one way in which community land trusts can be involved is that they get a formal say within the development corporation on decisions over the long term. So that's really one of the advantages. And also, of course, I think 75% of organisations within the community land trust network, 75% of their homes are at affordable and social rents. So they bring a real focus on meeting that need for affordable homes.
Just briefly follow up, and absolutely makes sense. They're a relatively small amount at the moment of sort of housing delivery, for good or ill. Are you suggesting that we could sort of significantly uplift the amount within new towns, and then we could use that as a model, or are you just sort of saying do more of what we're doing at the moment?
I mean, specifically within new towns is a real opportunity. I think the Community Land Trust Network itself has estimated that they could be delivering 7,800 social rent homes a year across their network if they were given the conditions to do so. So there is a real opportunity there, and that would give us about 8% of the annual total that we need to get to that 90,000. So given the right conditions, and new towns are one of the right conditions for doing it, there is a real opportunity there.
Thanks for that clarification. Back to you.
Sorry, we have to wrap it all up. Final question will be from me. We'll start with Tom and then go down the line. What would your final advice be to the government, the mayor, and the relevant London councils regarding London's proposed 2 new towns?
You're coming to me first. Get on with it. Yeah, I suppose it's a fairly critical. I mean, the need is so critical. I'd just re-emphasise the point about engagement. This can't be done without the communities who are going to be impacted by it. Yeah, I think that would be my main ask.
They should be well connected. If we want new towns to be a success and full of resilient communities, then it's of the utmost importance to make sure that they're connected via public transport to other places in London. And then the final point would be that new towns are a long project. Milton Keynes wasn't built overnight. And if you're an overcrowded family in Ealing, or you're living in a flat share in Hackney, the most important thing that you can get now is housing supply up. And new towns won't do that overnight. So there are other measures that are probably of more importance to London in the short term than new towns.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would really just reiterate that focus on making sure that new towns are meeting the huge scale of housing need that there is within London, and being ambitious with what can be delivered, and using them as an incubator for. We've talked today about the Hope Value reforms that actually hasn't been used, although it's been on the statute book for a couple of years, and new towns are a very good opportunity to make sure that beds in within our land market and that will have repercussions and positive effects for the viability of social rent delivery that go well beyond new towns themselves.
Please put the infrastructure in first.
On that note, we've now reached the end of the first panel discussion. I'd like to thank our first panel of guests for attending this afternoon and for their contributions. We'll now take a short adjournment for 5 minutes while we change panels. Welcome back to the London Assembly's Planning and Regeneration Committee. We now continue our discussion on new towns for London, and I would like to welcome our second panel of guests. In the chamber, we have Esther Everett, Director of Placemaking, London Legacy Development Corporation, James O'Malley, freelance journalist and podcaster, Susan Parham, Associate Professor, University of Hertfordshire, and John Walker, former Deputy Chief Executive, Milton Keynes Development Corporation, and former Chief Executive, Commission for New Towns. And joining us remotely is Guy Courtois, founder of Pour une Renaissance Urbaine. We'll now move on to our questions, and the first question is from me. I think we'll start with Esther and move down the panel. What would make new towns in London a success?
Yes, thank you for the question, Chair. I think the priority really especially from the LLDC's experience, is whatever model is used, that it needs to be starting with a vision and setting a vision right from that starting point, and for that vision to be something that's adaptable, that you understand and you expect that there will be change, the context will be changed, and the ability to change your vision to respond to the context, and particularly to be able to embrace innovative ideas that come forward, is absolutely key. So I think, and particularly for us, kind of at LLDC, context has changed enormously since 2012. Things like we set out to deliver housing, East Bank came forward, that had to replace the planned housing, changes for the better. We made a more holistic piece of London as a kind of result of that. I think the kind of second thing probably is really around innovation again as well, and embracing new ideas, responding to those challenges. I mean, we at LRDC at the moment, we are completing a post-occupancy evaluation study on all of the legacy homes that have been delivered. And through that, we've been looking at performance, and we're now embarking on responding to that performance information, which is data that's qualitative and quantitative, and then imagining how to put that back into our new housing. So we're embedding that within our contracts with developers, for example. One of the really critical things is responding to overheating and the performance of buildings. So we're seeing overheating in homes across that have been delivered, particularly within single aspect homes. So we are kind of really looking at how to kind of innovate and respond.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. The reason I'm on the panel is because I'm a writer and a podcaster, but also I actually live in Ebbsfleet, one of the few new towns that have been built in recent years. And I think what will make a new town in London successful is, and maybe this sounds stupid, but if it actually gets delivered and built, because a lot of the time when we talk about big projects, you have endless decades almost of discussion and planning and design and consultation, and then nothing will actually happen. I think the lesson from Ebbsfleet is really striking, because so for people who don't know, this is an area just to the southeast of London, just near Dartford, sandwiched between sort of Bluewater Shopping Centre and what is now Ebbsfleet Station. And there was plans to build housing there for a long time. For a long time, it was just going to be like volume builders, copy and pasting rows of houses. And this is since the early 2000s. And it's taken, a couple of decades since for there actually to be sort of an established community there. I think there's something around sort of 4,000 or 5,000 homes now in place. And it's taken such a long time for that to actually happen. So I think to actually make a new town, these two new towns in London successful, and I dare say hopefully more new towns in London successful, is going to be to actually deliver them faster if possible, because the housing crisis is here, it's now. People can't afford homes. I mean, the reason I live in Ebbsfleet is because I used to be a Londoner. I was priced out of London when my partner and I we wanted to buy a house, or we could have afforded a one-bedroom flat in Zone 6 maybe if we were lucky, but instead we found Ebbsfleet and were sort of priced out there because that's what we could afford. And the thing I always say is, me and my partner, we're doing all right. We're like white-collar professionals. We do jobs where we sit at computers doing meetings and and things like that. And so if we struggle to sort of afford somewhere to live, then how is everyone else managing, who are less lucky than we are? So I think, I think crucially, it's just working out how we can reduce the barriers to construction and getting things actually going and moving and getting things built and getting spades in the ground.
I would say that it's both about doing positive things and avoiding things where I think we know probably were mistakes, or we've learnt perhaps not to do them that way now. I've just been doing some work with colleagues for the Royal Town Planning Institute, looking at future-proofing new towns and looking at international case studies. And while the final report's not out, so I can't give you specifics from that, I can make some sort of in-principle comments about that. And one of the things we probably learnt from those examples was that sort of strong, consistent governance was really important, and that was across layers of government. So, you had a consistent focus at national government level that went on, really in their new towns around Paris, for example, since the 1960s. So we're talking a long time, and really good connections between that level of governance and then at the more local and sort of sub-regional level, so that they weren't, people were sort of pushing in the same direction. And then I think they also developed really good instruments, sort of planning instruments, that really help to speed things up. And I think, you've talked about the need to get housing, but obviously we've got to make places. Another thing that's been a real positive, I think, in some of our examples was real strength in regional and sub-regional transport connectivity. In Paris again, they had the Air Transilien network, which they've been extending recently. They're using trams to extend even further at a more localised level. And those aspects of connectivity have been really helpful. And then when it comes on to the sort of place-making qualities at the neighbourhood, I think what's happened in some of the new towns is that they've learnt from perhaps a more modernist approaches where you had, things separated out, very car-based effectively, that they needed to get walkability, transport orientation, active travel networks, mixed use, human scale. All these aspects of making places, they become kind of sort of truisms about how to make places well. But that wasn't necessarily the case when some of the new towns that we looked at were first developed. And what's happened in some of them is that retrofitting some of those other approaches, often using separated out areas and high-rise buildings and so on, has proving incredibly expensive. And they've struggled to make their town centres in these areas to work well. But we've got also more recent examples of retrofit in some of the new towns where they've built in some of the things I've just been talking about. And those have proved economically effective, popular with people, and making resilient places, including doing things like working on urban heat islands and so on. So I think we've got some things to, some positives to draw from this about the capacity to learn from our previous mistakes and make sort of human scale resilient urbanism in the future.
Okay. Yes, I'd agree with a lot of what's been said. The first thing to do is have a fairly clear vision of what you want as a community, what you want to see there in the long term, and to then make sure that that is turned into some kind of master plan that can represent it, not just physically but also economically and socially and environmentally. But the key thing also to distinguish it from just another nice idea is to choose the right delivery mechanism and to make sure that delivery mechanism is fit for purpose. And on this in particular, I think, learning from the past is crucial. Unlike science and technology, urban planning is, to my mind, a bit more like fashion. We go around in circles and we're very good at forgetting and very bad at learning. And there's an awful lot that can be learned, both bad and good, from what we've done in this country over the last 60 or 70 years. And rather than ignore it and learn those lessons again and then feel rather foolish about not knowing them, it would be really good if people understood what worked and what didn't work before and why, and then discount perhaps the 70 or 80% that no longer is relevant, but use the rest of it. So I'd say choosing the right delivery mechanism that can last the course, which is going to be a lot more than a normal political electoral cycle, is crucial.
Can I speak? Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead, Guy.
Hi, James. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here to share the French perspective. To answer to that question, I would say that the previous people just said most of what I wanted to say. But if I resume it from the French perspective and how we're doing now with new cities, I would say that all the new cities I'm working on and with my think tank, the new cities we're building like Plessis-Robinson, Clamart, Val d'Europe, and many others, I think the starting point was the analysis of the total failure of the previous new towns we've done in France for over 70 years. And I think that was the starting point. It was recognizing the failure of this modernist approach we had, very car-centric approach, no placemaking approach. And I think this was the starting point. So to understand also that the architecture was very important, because we fought for a very long time that just modernist building could do it. But actually, what we've learned with all the cities we've built, it's not enough. So what we've learned was we need to do good urbanism, we need to do good architecture. And those were the two key learnings. So from that, for me, there are four key things, four key success factors. The first one, as it's already been said, is to have a very clear vision of what we want. And we always start with that. And most of the cities, new cities that have been very successful in France, they had a very clear vision, in general with a mayor. It can be Jean-Didier Berger with Clamart or Philippe Pemzec with Plessis-Robinson, but could be also from a company like Disney Real Estate Company for Val d'Europe, who's been very efficient in defining a vision for what should be the city. So the city of Val d'Europe was phase number 4 of a bigger city, and it's been very successful. The second key factor, I think, is efficient legal management tools and leadership. We need to have a strong leadership and good tools, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. And this is very important, especially on how to capture the value land that makes everything possible. The third thing are good infrastructures, and most of the new towns we've built have very good infrastructure, either trams, RER, or others, and this is absolutely key in making those cities successful, because without good transportation infrastructures, you're far from the job, and it makes it very difficult to be an economic success for the city. And then maybe the fourth advice I will give to that assembly is that you need to bring expertise in, because we believe we can do it, but actually very good expertise on what is good urbanism, what is good architecture, and those kind of things is very rare. In the United States, you have the Congress for New Urbanism who does it, and I think in UK, you have, of course, the King's Foundation and also Create Streets, and you might have other organizations, I don't know. But I think you need the help of those organizations. They're very good at helping on those key things. So for me, these are the key things to make it a success.
Thank you all very much for those brilliant opening remarks. I will now pass over to Assembly Member Boff.
Apologies. What lessons should the GLA take from previous generations of new towns, including the post-war developments? And perhaps I can forward that to Mr. Walker.
Thank you. As you will appreciate, the previous government New Towns programme post-war lasted over 40 years, so that there's an awful lot you could talk about. And before that, of course, we had the private garden cities of Letchworth and Welwyn, and you can go back further and further. But one of the fundamental things about all of those, and particularly all of the post-war new towns, were delivered through the New Towns Act. And it's important to understand the difference between the New Town Development Corporation set up under that Act and the urban development corporations. And just to digress for a moment on that, because the urban development corporations, of course, as many of you will know, were set up by Michael Heseltine. He looked at the New Town Development Corporation Act and decided that it emphasised too much on planning. He didn't really want planning. He wanted intervention where there was market failure, and he wanted to actually stimulate private investment. And that was the basis of different legislation that was set up and was used in LDDC here, and subsequently it was also used in Merseyside and then lots of other places up and down the country. And in many ways it was very good at what it did, but it was doing a different job. It wasn't trying to build a new town, it wasn't trying to build a planned community, and he deliberately turned away from the New Towns Act because of that. So the first thing I would emphasise is you need to understand those differences, and they come down to one or two fairly important things. The New Town Development Corporations were required and expected to buy all the land very early on, all the development land. And they used the power of land ownership, their planning powers, and loans from government were the three things that drove forward their ability to develop. All of the new towns, whether you love them or hate them, developed at a much faster pace than anything that was going on before or around them, and to be honest, faster pace than most things that have happened since as well. So they achieved pace, they achieved some sort of expression of a planned vision. Whether you like that vision or not is irrelevant, because you'd have a different vision today. And they were able to not pay for themselves. I've heard a few times, because I was sitting listening to the last panel, references to the new towns being self-funding. I was the person who handed over the cheque to Richard Caborn in 1998 for the final repayment of the loans on the new towns, 40 years before it was due. And I was very proud at telling people that the new town corporations had paid for themselves, and it's true they did. But the loans given to the new town corporations didn't make up all of the finance going into the new towns. There was other finance coming through other government departments, for schools, for hospitals, etc. So don't expect a new town to be self-financing, but the new town development corporations were self-financing, and that gave them a great strength, because it enabled them to actually show that if the governments persevered with them, they would get their money back. And they lived through several periods of very hostile political climate, including the entire Thatcher period, and survived. Many of them survived that. The Milton Keynes one was last to close down in 1992. So the delivery vehicle had its strengths in terms of long-term vision and delivery in a joined-up way of that vision, but it also had financial strengths, because nearly all of its expenditure was in the first 2 or 3 years, assembling the land and starting to put in the major infrastructure, or perhaps 5 or 6 years. After which, of course, any government that wanted to shut it down had difficulty, because it was looking at a massive debt and no way of getting the money back. So the strength in terms of its robustness was quite outstanding, whereas the urban development corporations were set up, including London Docklands, mainly with grant aid. There was some loan finance, and particularly later on more loan finance came in, but it was mainly grant aid. They were set up to do a job to stimulate private sector investment. They could be used to build a new town because the skills overlap and the powers overlap, but they weren't designed to do that. And a classic example is Ebbsfleet, which is badged as a new town, was actually a private sector site where the developers basically cherry-picked every site they could that they could build cheaply without having to put too much infrastructure in. And when they ran out of room to build, Osborne created an urban development corporation and initially threw a lot of money at it. It wasn't loan finance, it was grant finance, to try and dig them out of the hole they were in and put the infrastructure in and get it going again. Why he didn't choose a new town development corporation, I don't know, but I suspect it was because he had the same philosophy, perhaps, that Michael Heseltine had, which was that plan-led was not really what he wanted. He wanted private investment-led. So, sorry, that's a bit of a ramble, but I hope I've addressed the question.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you for that. Unfortunately, I've got more questions to ask you as a result of what you've just said. So are you... we see the two different models, one grant-aided, one effectively self-funding through loans, which have to be paid back. Is a new town in the boundary of the GLA, the Greater London Authority, actually possible?
It's a very good question, because the advantage that any development corporation gives you is it's a slightly more robust and a very focused organisation, which a local authority would find it difficult to do given all the other things it has to do. But a new town development corporation in London, to my mind, is most appropriate where you've got a largely, but not entirely, greenfield site. New town corporations were used to create town extensions. I mean, Northampton, Peterborough, Warrington, 3 very, very large town extensions, all done through the New Towns Act with new town development corporations. You could use a new town development corporation in London in that kind of site. The legislation you're probably again aware of in 2017-18 was altered through an all-party amendment in the House of Lords to one of the acts that was going through to allow for locally led new town development corporations. None has been used yet, but it's an area worth exploring. They need a bit more work doing in terms of how their finances work and the planning processes. But a new town development corporation would be an option, and I think certainly ought to be looked at. When you come to somewhere like Thamesmead, I think it's a much more complex question. I don't know Thamesmead that well. I don't know either of the sites well. But I would say there, with a dominant landowner, Peabody, whether a new town development corporation would be better than an urban development corporation would need a bit more thought and a bit more study. But in both cases, a development corporation would give you a vehicle that is freed, if you like, from the electoral cycle as much as it can be, and is focused on getting on with its job. And if it does its job well, you should be pleased. And if it doesn't, you sack the chairman of the board and the chief executive and appoint a new one and tell it what it's doing wrong. So I think, you know, there are definite advantages in having a development corporation of some type. Whether it's a new town corporation in both of those sites, I don't know.
Thank you. Ms. Parham, have you got anything in addition to that about the lessons to be learned from?
Yes, I have actually, and I'd like to sort of shift the ground slightly. I thought that discussion about processes and governance and the financing of this and how you're going to actually make it work in those terms is really interesting. But I wanted to say a little bit about some of the lessons about the placemaking. You know, we know that I've just been teaching about new towns and garden cities this morning, actually, with my planning students, and we talked about some of the issues that came up with compulsory acquisition. Remember, Baron Silken was called. You know, they talked about Silkengrad. You know, that this sort of sense of people very unhappy about their freeholds. You know, they've been taken from them as they saw it. Problems with infrastructure not being finished, you know, the places being unfinished, while, you know, lack of robust materials in the architecture, and architectural experiments, which, you know, proved to be quite problematic and have been very expensive to fix up. Some issues, I think, coming out of the neighbourhood, the design, sort of, you know, neighbourhood unit ideas, Radburn layout ideas, understandably were very influential, I think, but they actually didn't really help to halt car dependency, and the problems that have come from that. And the fact that they didn't have a kind of, they had, you know, we've just discussed that, but they didn't have land value capture in the way that the garden cities at least started with. So there was no sense that any uplift in value from them was going back to support the people that lived there. And I think that, you know, in a sense you could say was a kind of a, you know, a sort of financial miss. If I could make one more comment about this. Some of these are not just issues that came up in the UK. In our international examples we looked at through the future proofing, you could see some of the similar sorts of things that happened in other places. But some have been quite effective at actually starting to fix that. And I think our online speaker mentioned some of the work, you know, places in Val d'Europe, you know, Le Plessis Robinson, Clamart, have been really good at kind of dealing with that. And we also see in this country places like Poundbury, Nansleddon, Shenford, Tornagrain, Chapelton of Elsick, showing that actually it's possible to make new towns today which really avoid some of these more sort of problematic elements.
Thank you. Mr. O'Malley, obviously you've lived through a little bit of it with Ebbsfleet, and bar the Eurostar not stopping there, what lessons do you think we can gain from Ebbsfleet in addition?
Yeah, I think there's loads of interesting things. So first of all, I want to echo comments on the first panel and also John's comments about. I think the development corporation model. I think that's definitely essential to actually making things happen. I think I may have mentioned it a minute ago, but like. I think before there was a development corporation, something like 65 homes were built in Ebbsfleet, and then it took the development corporation basically aligning the incentives of everyone to drive through the development of the area. So having that vehicle in place to sort of make sure everyone's going in the same direction. And then this does allow for the sort of more strategic master planning of the area. So the thing that's really great about Ebbsfleet is that they've planned basically the entire layout from years ago, and you can sort of see it beginning to emerge, and that's particularly important when it comes to transport. As the speaker in the first session mentioned, having those transport connections are important. So the area wouldn't exist without Ebbsfleet International Station, which I think was built in the mid-2000s, and then it's just something as simple as so near close to where I live, there is a fast track bus route. It's a segregated road specifically for buses that links basically Bluewater Shopping Centre and Ebbsfleet International Station, going through the entire Ebbsfleet development. And the fact that this was thought about and built and planned, rather than just housing developers building houses and then making everyone car dependent, the fact that everyone basically in the entire development is within a 5-minute walk at most of a bus route is fantastic, because it means we can build with and live without sort of car dependency. And then there's many other sort of smaller design aspects of Ebbsfleet which I think have been handled really well. So the whole development, we call it Ebbsfleet, is actually sort of infilling a whole area around that part of North Kent. But the core area, the White Cliff, as it's called, this former quarry where they're now building, it's been split into, they're calling it villages. So each different area has its own sort of village centre. And so everyone is basically within 5-minute, 10-minute walk of sort of basic amenities, a shop, a community centre, a cafe in some cases, and so on. And they're building a larger town centre at the moment. And just the fact that they've thought about that means you basically avoid the famous North Stowe problem of building tons of houses in the middle of nowhere without anything to do, because without this sort of village centre, and there's not that much of village centre to it. All it is, I'm thinking of certainly my local area, which is a shop and a cafe. But like even just having that gives it more of a sense of place, and reduces the number of car journeys people need. But yeah, I think the transport connections are essential. I think sort of having that master plan in place is essential, because you can see it being built out. Yeah, those are the crucial things, and having the vehicle to actually make sure everyone's on the same page, because you can sort of see the sort of how other areas and sort of other developments, they get opposition from people nearby who don't want things to be built. Having a development corporation that does actually drive things forward, and is actually really important when you actually want to deliver something as strategic as a new town, because it is a big deal. And that's if we're going to tackle the housing crisis. Don't get me wrong, I think it's very important that we densify and infill other places and build developments elsewhere as well. But if you want to make sort of these big swings, which are going to make a huge difference to the housing crisis, I think Ebbsfleet's going to be 15,000 homes in all. You do need to have that strategic body that can act with the sort of the national strategy, as it were, and rather than be at the behest of sort of grumpy local residents, or if you see what I mean.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. My next question will be to Guy. The model in France seems to be one more of urban extensions rather than new towns in completely isolated places. So could you just tell us what lessons there are particularly for urban extensions like Clamart, and how important the extension of the tram network was to the housing that then came forward in Clamart?
Yes, absolutely. So to understand the story of Clamart, the mayor Jean-Didier Berger was elected in 2000, and he was previously the CEO of the Sempro, which is the company who built the city of Plessis-Robinson. And the city of Plessis-Robinson in France is, I will say, one of the first one with Val d'Europe to have had this new approach about what we call here new urbanism or renaissance urbaine. And the idea was to have a human-centric approach, which has a lot of impacts, and they've been mentioned by Susan, but placemaking is absolutely key. So I think that the first thing is that the mayor had a very clear vision of what he wanted to do, because he was before the CEO of the company building Le Plessis-Robinson, so already using and putting in practice those things. This is why he's being so quick in changing his city when he's been elected, because he was already preparing all that before being elected. So this is the first thing. And I think maybe the key lesson for other countries of Clamart is really the tools they have used to achieve it, on how to capture the land value, because this is the key on how to finance everything. All the good things we're talking about, like greenery, lakes, placemaking, schools, and everything. So the way they do it is that all the different cities, they gathered and they create what we call an établissement public territorial, so a territorial public establishment. It's not a company, they're gathering together. And this EPT then will create une société publique locale. So it's a local public company that will be in charge of building the new part, the new district of the city. And so this company is 100% owned by all the cities who are participating to that. And even if it's on this specific city, Clamart now. And then what they do is that they always do it the same, whatever the city is doing, but they always do the same to capture the value land. They preempt the land. And doing so gives you a lot of very positive issues, because when you preempt the land, then of course, it's very difficult the negotiation of the price will be very difficult. And it's always happening. We have issues when we're negotiating the price with the sellers. For instance, in Clamart, I think the seller EDF was asking more than 100 million euros. And we ended up buying it around, I think the price was 45 million euros, 17 plus 28. So you see more than half the price. And obviously it was not easy, this discussion, but we ended up doing that. And when you buy the land at a good price, then the Société Publique Locale, what it does, we name a lead architect, urbanist, for the whole district. And this lead architect will design all the principles of, walkability, parks, schools, everything. He will design the whole city, not the architecture, just the global urban approach. And we will create different lots, a lot of lots. And in that case, it was, I think, around 10 lots. And then we will sell the lots for bids, and private developers can compete and buy the lots, and they will have to build all the buildings that have been designed by the lead urbanist. And when they sign the contract to buy the lot and to build it, they agree to a lot of rules. A lot of rules on architecture style, on what are the equipments they are obliged to build, what are the social housing they're obliged to build and sell at a very low price to the housing companies. So there's a bid, and all the big companies will answer to that bid and will buy the lot, and they agree to all the different rules that have been set up. And so this is how we control very, very well what will be built. And then they build it, and they have to respect the rule. And just to give you the land capture value, I took two examples. In Zac Panorama, more or less, to buy the land, it costed around 45 million for the two first plots, and around 55 million if we add the last one we bought from, not from EDF, but from another one. And the selling price, I did not add the official prices, but I did my own calculation, more or less, and I think it's around 105 million euros. So more or less, the Société Publique Locale captured 50 million euros of margin. And with 50 million euros, you can build a big lake. This is what we did. You can build a school, you can build streets, you can build ports, you can build a lot of beautiful things. And so this is it. I give you another example. In Puteaux, there's a big project, Zac des Bergères. More or less, there's the same approach as Zac Panorama that you visited, James, with me a few months ago. In Puteaux, to buy all the land, it costed 150, and those numbers are accurate because they've been published. It costed 153 million euros to buy all the lands, and all the lots that have been sold to the developers represented 276 million euros. So the land capture by the city was 123 million euros. So with all that money, you can build schools, streets, sports, everything, equipment, sport equipment, all that thing. So I think this model, which is replicated in all the new urban extension I'm following in France, it's always this model that is used. Very effective model because it gives you a lot of financial area, and you do a loan with a bank to finance the thing, but you have reimbursed your loan when you have finished your project. So it's not a 50 years loan. It's like a 10 or 15 years loan because the project in general lasts 10 years or 15 years, and then it's done. And then the city is much, much richer because then you have all the revenue from all these new buildings. And so those city gets richer and richer doing that. They create a lot of values for their inhabitants, and that's it. And then I could talk about a lot of things like social mixity, which is absolutely key for me, but it's another subject.
Thank you very much, Guy, for that really comprehensive overview of the model in France and how it's working. Just on some of the points you raised, so how important would you say that having that single public landowner is in terms of this model, and how easy is it for them to borrow money? So how easy is it for a local mayor, for that development corporation to borrow money? And then how important was the transport connectivity in allowing that new housing to be built?
So I think that it's essential that it's done by the city or a company owned by the city, because it's how you manage the whole process and you can really develop your vision. So this is absolutely key. And this is how you capture the value for the citizens and not for developers. How to get money in general, those projects are super profitable. In general, not all of them. But when I say super profitable, in reality, in the end, they're not, because all the money that has been gained is spent into infrastructure. So the objective is at the end that there's no more money, and then you close the company. This is how it works. But so to get loans, for instance, in Clamart, what did the mayor was very clever. He went to talk to the state, and he obtained a very specific status that CNI, un contrat national d'intérêt, and so with this specific status, it means that you have the support of the French state. And so then you go to the bank. In that case, it was La Banque des Territoires. And you go to see the bank and you say, oh, I need, to buy the land. It was, as we said, altogether 55 million euros. You need to pay it. So I need the loan for that, but you get it because you present the whole business case, and who wouldn't accept such a business case? So you get the money. So yeah, this is how it works.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a difference in our system is the ability of mayors to borrow. It's something we could potentially learn. And then just on the tram, how important was that tram extension?
Yeah, I think transportation is absolutely key in the success of those projects. And in general, we always build the transport before the city itself or the district, because it's very difficult to make it a success to sell apartments if there's no good transportation. So, for instance, Val d'Europe, the first thing we did was to build RER up to Euro Disney and to make sure we had a very good transportation. And then it was possible to build the city around the train station. And exactly for that panorama, first came the tramway. And when the tramway was here, then you were sure because it's very difficult to convince developers to buy your lots at a high price if there's no transportation. So it's absolutely key to have a good transportation. And this is why we have developed all this very huge program of more than 25 billion euros of new transportation around Paris with new metro lines and a lot of new tramways. So it's absolutely key to the success.
Thank you very much. And just finally, you mentioned about the urban master planning, and I think touched on the architecture as well. How do the mayors or the development corporation engage with the people living there in terms of bringing that forward? Do they engage much, or do they just say what's going to come forward?
So there's the official version and the real versions. They're not really the same, but the official version is whenever you do the ZAC, you're obliged, it's compulsory to imply the population. So there's, we organize walks, committees, a lot of things are done. So this is one thing. But for sure, all the mayors who are building all those new cities, they do not want to replicate the failure of the past. So they in their mind, for them, not only good urbanism, but also good architecture is absolutely key. So they have exactly in mind what they want, the kind of architecture they want. And in that case, in France, what we call the architecture we have, we call it neo-traditional architecture or neo-vernacular architecture. Sometimes we could call it like neo-eclectic because it's a mix of kind of eclecticism of different styles. But so they will impose that point of view of architecture, but they will still consult all the people through the legal processes. But the truth is that it's exactly what the people want, because we do regular polls, and I think Trade Streets do those polls too in United Kingdom, and we always come up with the same results. It's always 80% who prefer neo-traditional style, and 20% to prefer modernist style. So I think it proves what people want. Plus the history has proved in France that the value of neo-traditional approach are today priced at a much higher level compared to the modernist buildings. And there's a very big difference value today. Just an example, very interesting. Post-war, we have built a lot of new towns in France, but we have rebuilt Saint-Malo in a very neo-traditional style, and Saint-Malo became one of the most touristic city in north of France. And that's very interesting because it's a completely new town. And you have Le Havre, which has been built in a modernist approach. And Le Havre is today, it's very interesting. The architect was great, whatever you want to say, but it's not touristic. The value of the city is low compared to Saint-Malo and all those things. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Baker.
Thank you. Susan, can I ask you what you think how the conditions differ when developing a new town as an urban extension, as we've been listening to, and that we're looking at in London, as opposed to building standalone developments? What do we need to consider?
As opposed to standard developments, sort of the commercial, what we normally do?
So a new town sort of at some distance from another urban centre, as opposed to what we're proposing in London, and what we've heard about, which is either directly on the edge or actually in a. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, your mic is not.
That might help.
Yes.
I think it's really interesting to see the new towns task force identified Cruise Hill and Chase Farm, and of course Thamesmead, and in as sites that could work in the area of London. And actually, for me, they make a lot of sense. I mean, Thamesmead's already. I think John's already touched on this, but Thamesmead's already. It's really happening with Peabody already. It needed that kind of retrofit. There will be some sort of sustainable. I mean, I think some of the proposed work will extend what's there already, as well as retrofitting the existing, and that makes that seems to me a very sensible thing to be doing. There might be, I think, dealing with water could be an interesting one, but I'm sure that'll get sorted. Cruise Hill, Chase Farm has got some transport connections, so it could be a really effective extension, and also it's currently a form of sprawl. It's underdeveloped, it's got a golf course, it's got, I mean, I do accept that the people who are running businesses there, don't want that things to change, and you can understand that absolutely, but that does it's an incredible resource, I think, for its potential there. So I think one of the reasons why, and our international work showed this, extensions often make sense is that because you're next to the infrastructure already, and I think he made it very clear, that Paris has already got this incredible patrimony, but then so's London. London's got this amazing sort of, infrastructure, movement, mobility infrastructure to work on, and so extensions kind of work in that sense. But we don't know, going back in the kind of history, and John touched on this, for the garden cities, and then into the first round of new towns, the intention was, and this was actually true in Paris, the first round, they wanted to take the heat off an overheated central Paris economically. And they were very successful actually in doing that, and they did actually decentralise economic activity. So moving it further out, they intentionally made them so they wouldn't be so easily commutable. We know in the UK, people still commuted in, but the intention was, as you know, to make these places, first the garden cities and then the new towns, to have a kind of good balance between living and local working opportunities. So I still think there is, there really is scope for both. And I think one of the things I really liked about the New Towns Task Force kind of approach was that they were open to different kinds of spatial arrangements. It really depended on circumstances, and I think the 12 sites, they said there are a lot more that could be possible, of a real mix of these different kinds of possibilities, and that for me, is a sort of sensible kind of, spreading out of the strategy, because of the sort of pros you can get from being further, being away and being in a greenfield, as well as those for an extension, but not, as you say, you don't want to be, as James says, be in the middle of nowhere. And I think that was one of the things that really made the eco-towns sort of fall down, was that, it made sense to be out using excess land that wasn't needed by authorities at that time, but former airfields, railway land, all sorts of military land, but it wasn't necessarily in the right place. And I think the work that Transport for New Homes did, showing that where some of the garden settlements have been put, just built-in car dependency, shows that if you do choose a greenfield site, you have to be really careful that it's well located in terms of particularly those kind of wider transport connectivity issues, and then to do the kinds of things that Guy talks about, of getting that infrastructure in first.
Yeah. So this is really interesting. So basically, the opportunity to make sure the transport infrastructure is correct is somewhat easier if you're adding it on to something, rather than having to.
Exactly, it's cheaper and it can be quicker. And we see that just in the way London's been expanding anyway. I mean, look at the amazing things happening in sort of Barking or Old Oak Common, or I mean, you've got so many fascinating examples of fantastic master planning and capacity to build on what's already there. But I wouldn't want to kind of foreclose on the fact that there are possibilities also, I think, in a greenfields way. And, I was probably a bit negative about some of the lessons of the first round of new towns. One of the things they did do, as has been pointed out, was provide an incredibly large amount of of housing in place for people that was really needed. You know, so in that sense, it's a success story. And they also were done in places that weren't necessarily next to other things, although some were.
Thanks. Can I just ask a follow-up, and then I'll come to you, John, if that's okay. In terms of ensuring that the right services, there are local neighbourhoods, as we heard, like local services and stuff like that, is there any difference in general between when something is an extension or a sort of greenfield new town, or is that all to do with whether it's planned well?
I think so.
Yeah,
I mean, I think you want to make sure that the kind of placemaking works at every scale. You know, we know that most trips are really local. We've got so much scope for active travel, and we know we've got to do it if we don't bankrupt our health service apart from other things. We've got to have that kind of resilience, and it's also resilience in the face of climate change. You know, that localising things is really important. It's going to be harder for people to go further away, and it's also going to be harder for doing things like living in high-rise buildings, actually, but it's another story, because they're very expensive to look after over the long term. But I think it really does come down to really excellence in placemaking, master planning, and kind of thinking this through to get a kind of resilience. And I know that these are sort of awful academic terms, but nature-based solutions, dealing with urban heat island effects, food focus. We know we need more resilience in relation to our food system and localising that. There's all sorts of things that you need to make sure are built in.
Thanks very much. Sorry, John, did you want to come in?
Sorry,
John, were you indicating, did you want to come in?
Just to add one thing, I agree with what Susan said, but I think it also comes back down to you making sure you have a clear vision for what you want there, because you could say this is a place for housing for Londoners, and therefore you reinforce all the infrastructure that leads to where the jobs are. You could say you want an area that's more self-contained, where there's almost a balance. I mean, all the new towns were built on the basis of more jobs than homes, so that they actually attracted net in commuting. But you wouldn't necessarily do that there. I think it's a big question mark over what kind of place you want, and your infrastructure needs to serve that, alongside the placemaking issues that Susan mentioned.
Thanks. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Susan, again, do you have any views on any international approaches to sort of the long-term public management of new towns and what might be most suitable for London? Do you have any views on what we might learn?
Well, it's interesting that in a way that the Urban Development Corporation's sort of wound up.
Yeah.
I think that we know, I mean, Letchworth, I guess, going back a bit further, is unique and it's got its own Act of Parliament, but the Letchworth Garden City Heritage Foundation, it's got the model, the political model in Letchworth is different. It's got voted in governors, the whole thing kind of works together, and I don't think we're probably going to go back to that in most other places. But I do think, it has to have a really sort of explicit, sort of transparent, sort of, political imprimatur and kind of legitimacy. And I think that goes to a point, actually, I think that Andrew raised earlier, and I think about, or it might have been James, about engagement. And I think that part of the process of this is about how we get there, so that places are seen to be kind of legitimate and expressing, the desires and the kind of needs of communities and the people who've got an interest in their development rather than otherwise. And I think the King's Foundation was mentioned, as were some others, but some of those sort of kinds of approaches like inquiries by design, urban design charrettes, and I know those have been used in London too, are really important, I think, so that people are working together on kind of co-design from the very start. And I'm sure the legacy people, have got a lot to say. Estev's, I'm sure, has got some things to say about that, actually. But I think, the way you get there is really important about the kind of outcomes you're going to achieve and having that long-term, capacity to manage and to govern effectively.
Is there any... This is a slightly how long is a piece of string question, so apologies, so you can tell me if it's a bad question. But do you have any sense of, ideally, how long you would have to sort of manage a new town in a specific way before it just becomes embedded and just like any other place?
I don't think stewardship ever stops.
Yeah.
I think, you're going to have some kind of structural arrangements to help support stewardship. As Guy pointed out, because of the land value capture they've got there, they've been able to add in all sorts of elements. Letchworth does that. They've got, things you wouldn't usually have in a town of 32,000, 34,000 people, because they've got that extra that extra financial, capacity to be able to add in, health services, a cinema, will look after their green space. They've also got a sort of scheme of management, as has Hampstead Garden Suburb actually. So sometimes I think processes of of governance that don't stop but allow a certain amount of latitude for people, but also give framework and maintain stewardship. And it also comes down to the kind of built form. If you build things which are not using robust materials, if you use techniques and kinds of designs that don't last, and that was sort of the way that modernism worked in the 20th century. It was just assumed that was reasonable. We don't think like that anymore. We have to be much more careful with our resources. So it will help if the fabric also works to support that.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to check if... Oh, sorry. Yes, apologies, John.
Because I've got some experience in this from Milton Keynes and other new towns.
Please, yes.
I mean, one of the things I think must be done this time around is you must try and decide on your long-term stewardship arrangements very early on. The post-war new towns are often criticised for not having done that. But, in fact, that's not entirely valid criticism. The government arrangement for stewardship was built into the New Towns Act, but various governments that came after diluted it and in many ways undermined it. The arrangement was that all the public amenities would be, the parks and all the community facilities would be handed over with an endowment from land value capture to the local authorities. Now, over several decades, that started to go wrong. Partly it started to go wrong because some local authorities in some of the new towns took the endowment and spent it in the first 2 or 3 years on something else and then started pleading poverty. They couldn't maintain their parks. The other thing that changed, of course, was a political attitude, particularly in the late 70s onwards, from central government towards local government, which was we don't trust them to manage anything, and therefore we want other solutions. So when we got towards the end of the New Towns programme, and Milton Keynes would be probably the best example of this, although there are other smaller ones, we handed over all of our parks to a charitable trust that we set up. We handed it the same endowment that would have gone to the local authority. It was £18 million. That trust has now got an endowment of £150 million because it's grown it rather than spent it, and it maintains the parks to a very high standard. Now, that was an arrangement that was born out of politics as much as anything. I wouldn't say it was carefully thought through in the first instance. It's actually worked extremely well. But I think it shows the importance of thinking through stewardship from the beginning, identifying where the resources are coming from, earmarking them, because if you buy the land and you get the land value capture, what do you do with it? Well, you build the roads with it, you build the parks with it, you build all those sorts of things, but you also need to set aside some of it as an endowment for long-term stewardship, and you need to know who you're handing over to. And having a long-term stewardship body in place early on would also help with many of the things to do with standards, because if, for instance, landscaping is being implemented in such a way that it's particularly difficult to maintain, or it results in safety hazards in terms of public perception of walking around places. All of that needs to be fed back, and a stewardship body set up early on with a long-term view of running those facilities could make have a lot of benefits to any development process.
Thank you. Thanks very much. That's really helpful. Back to you, Chair.
Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. The New Towns Task Force recommended that a dedicated development corporation should be established to facilitate the development of new towns. What do you think the delivery model should be? And we've had a lot of discussion around that already. Is there any... Firstly, I don't know if it should be the same everywhere. So should there be several models to choose from? Or should that decision be left locally? And how much vision around what is delivered financially should the government be putting in before they send any money across, which of course they haven't signalled that they're going to? I'll start with John.
Yes, thank you. I mean, you've got, as I hope I started to explain, you've got several different kinds of development corporation on the books. And I don't know whether government is going to bring forward new legislation to in any way merge or improve on those. But at the moment, you've got the new town development corporations. you've got, in theory, a locally led version of that, which gives local authorities a much greater control, but at the moment, big question marks over how that's financed and some of the planning issues. And then you've got the urban development corporations, which I would say weren't invented in order to do the job of long-term vision and planning, but have been used to some extent to that and could do it, but I would say probably not ideal. And the mayoral development corporations are a bit like those. If you've got a development that's going to require large-scale government money, I think you've probably got to expect that they're going to want to have some hand in the governance of it. The early new towns were completely government-controlled, although they had local authorities on the boards. I mean, half of our board at Milton Keynes was always made up from the local authorities, but they were controlled by central government, and they were financed by central government. If you go to a more shared finance model, where you've got local government and central government both putting some money in, then I expect you'd want a governance model which the locally led version might give you, which would give some kind of balance between the two. And I think you have got to look at where the money's coming from before you can really realistically determine who's going to have control of it. If you expect to have complete local control but lots of government money coming in, I think you're going to be disappointed.
Yes, I sit on a different committee looking at this, and one of my big questions is, where are the Treasury in all this? They've been quite absent in the conversation. Susan, the similar question to you. What do you feel about the governance? Who should be in charge? Is there something new they need to do, or do we already possess the model?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I was an absolute expert on this process side, but I do have a couple of things I'd probably add in, and I'd certainly like to give other panellists a chance to comment too. But I suppose the sort of principle about on the development corporation side and on governance is that you do need to be able to bring everyone together who's got interest. And as you say, Lord Bailey, Treasury, you know, and as John's pointed out, those who've got you know, wanting to make sure they're keeping a grip on public finances are obviously going to be really interested and want to have, you know, quite a say in this. So it's really important, I think, that those people all have to be there. And it's also, I think, necessary just for speed reasons, because I think if you don't have some kind of structure that brings people together in this way to manage this and to get it over the line, it will take too long. And we already know that there's a lack of fit between, you know, the urgency of housing need and the likely timeframes for getting things done. And that's already, I think, a kind of a structural problem. So trying to sort of squeeze that down as much as possible. And I think you've already got, you know, mayoral development corporation kind of models in London that, you know, I would have assumed that you'll be reflecting on, you know, what London already does and what you can learn from your own practice, and if there are things to adapt and extend and make use of, where you've already got that kind of governance understanding. And as John said, you know, so one doesn't forget one's own institutional memory of being able to do this. And I think, you know, we obviously got things to learn, I think, through our Olympics legacy, actually, and that I think would be interesting to see, you know, what might make sense to do this.
Because technically, the Olympic legacy and ODPC and all the rest of that, you could ask the question, why hasn't the mayor done this already? He has enough power to do these kind of things, doesn't he? Could we just say, let's not rely on the government because they're going to take forever? Let's get on with it, Sadiq.
I think the thing that
Continue the microphone on, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the thing that I'd like to kind of touch on a little bit is the kind of the importance within the delivery model, whatever delivery model it is, that placemaking is kind of fundamentally at the kind of heart of that. And that is needed because it needs to provide opportunities for local people. And I think the sort of bit that's maybe missing from this conversation is around how we include local people, whether it's in the governance or in the kind of co-creation. I know we have touched a bit on co-design, but that's absolutely critical. It's critical for buy-in, but it's also critical for making sure that the places that we deliver are successful, but they're also fit for purpose for future generations. And I think part of that is about being clear in each of the locations, wherever it is, in London, that you know, one asks oneself, who is that community? and take pains and time to understand that community and to find models to build trust with them so that they are part of this governance.
But one could argue that the governance model is at least influential, if not essential, to if you have any involvement. Because you could build a governance model that was 100% democratic and everybody had their say, or you could build one that shuts them out, and the tension there is delivery of speed in delivery, I think. Let me quickly come to James then. How are you going to explain these things so you get some buy-in? Because when I speak to my neighbours and I talk about, the minute I say development corporation, I can see people's eyes roll back in their head because they just think committee. And one of my neighbours who is very experienced in delivering big projects will say to me, unless somebody's in charge, and somebody being a group of people or a person, and everybody, failure hides very well in a committee is a term he uses. So how would you like to see as a resident, what do you think residents would like to see, A, about who they need to go to get involved, to Esther's point, to get involved, and B, how do we get across to people who's in charge and they're serious about delivery?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a big role for making, trying to bring people with you. That's the phrase people use. Like, I used to live on the Olympic Park. It's an incredible thing that's been done there. But I do want to speak up in defence of speed and just doing stuff, slightly controversially perhaps, because I think a lot of legitimacy comes from delivery. Oftentimes it's like, well, should we let's consult people, let's try and bring people in, let's try and have more discussions. That's just ultimately going to slow things down. Whereas I think a lot of the legitimacy of the development corporation can come from people seeing the local area change. Certainly, where I live, I've lived in Ebbsfleet now for almost 5 years, and over that time I have seen the amenities and the facilities and the transport options all improve. And if you ask people, I actually posted on Facebook that I was coming to this today, and I asked my neighbours and said, well, what do you think Ebbsfleet's done well and what do you think could be improved? And a lot of people said, transport is a really big issue, and having that sort of connectivity, and certainly, and again, this is a hyper-local example, but in our case, the local bus route took several years to arrive. I think I lived in the area 3 years before there was a regular bus, so everyone was sort of living this car-dependent lifestyle. And then when the bus was launched, then everyone was very happy with that. So I think there is a real need to approach this with urgency and a need to actually show results, and that's a way of sort of legitimising the development corporation model. And the one thing I would say is I'd also turn it a little bit around on politicians. I would say to you, the politicians, don't be afraid to pick a fight. I think when you're doing something on the scale of a new town or something like Ebbsfleet or something like that, then inevitably people are going to get upset. There are existing residents who live in villages nearby who probably aren't massively delighted by things being built nearby. But ultimately, if you're building a new town, you're sort of saying, well, this is for the greater good. This is because of the housing crisis. It's a big national problem and we need to build houses somewhere. So while it's important to sort of listen to people's concerns and so on, they shouldn't be able to, they shouldn't necessarily be a veto there, or it should be weighed against broader priorities. And I think as politicians, certainly my impression is there's a lot of the time there is a sort of aversion to wanting to do things, because obviously I guess you've always got an eye on the next election, wanting to retain votes. But ultimately, if you're doing something big like building a new town, you are going to upset people. But then that's the trade-off, and I think it's important to recognise there is a trade-off there, and doing the thing that's going to get something actually delivered.
I think you're correct. I'm one of those people who always asks NIMBYs where their children are going to live. I think it's very important. And just to return to back to structure, Esther, how can you build a structure that includes outsiders? Because we are talking about a new town now, which effectively is housing for the whole of London, not just for whichever local authorities delivered or that particular corner. And that means representing people who don't yet exist. So is there a structure that says, OK, you are local, but we are trying to make new local people as well, and some things you can represent, but we need to take a representation from outside of here. I put that to anyone who has a good idea. Is there a structure?
Lord Bailey, we do have a question from Assemblyman Maker, which is directly relevant, I think,
well,
to
I did say governance structure, but hey. I'll let Assembly Member Baker answer that, but I'm very interested in the answer for that. In that case, Chair, I'll come back to you.
Assemblymember Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we are. Well, Esther, you've already started talking about engagement, so that was the next question we were going to ask. So, Esther, if I start with you, you've already started talking about this, but what's the best way to engage with Londoners on proposed new towns overall? And also, do you have any lessons that we can take from the LLDC and OPDC's experiences consulting with local communities?
Yes. I am happy to answer that question and also to reflect on the previous comments as well. I think the lessons from my experience at LLDC particularly is around thinking about genuine community engagement and partnerships. Some of the things that we've done kind of from the early days was to identify existing groups to work with, not just community groups, but also business groups, local creative people and businesses, for example, in Hackney Wick, and to not kind of come in and establish necessarily new ways of doing things, but to work and support existing structures that are already there. More recently, we've kind of widened that out and we've established something called the Community Anchors Network, which represents a very broad and diverse range of voices from a wider geographical area, so not necessarily just focused directly around the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. And that is kind of proving really, really successful in our mission to extend the opportunities for local people further into East London and to really deliver on inclusive growth. We also have specific groups that we've targeted. One is a kind of inclusion, so really looking at what accessibility means. In 2012, a built environment access panel was set up with both local lived experience and also expertise from industry. So it's a mix of people. And the representation is across disability, faith, culture, neurodiversity, gender, mental health, sexual orientation and age. And that we find and we continue to find that that's incredibly useful in terms of really questioning proposals coming forward and providing all the people who are working on the delivery of any type of kind of urban development, and this could be anything from a really large master plan to a piece of policy to a singular building. So we've used this panel across a number of scales, and through that we found sort of genuine conversations around inclusion and inclusive design. At the moment we're piloting using that further afield across London. We're doing a pilot with Housing and Land, and we've done one more recently with the Crown Estate. So looking at how a kind of part local but part wider panel can actually work in different locations. And I think the other side of that's really, really important is young people and youth and engaging with them. I mean, that is who we're building these towns for in the, that's who they're for. They're not for all of us necessarily. And the number of times when I kind of go into any kind of room and see the sort of diversity in age, and it is kind of rare that you really get that kind of younger voice in the room. And so we've learned that putting those people in a position of kind of power and governance and hearing from them is really important. I mean, I would suggest that getting young people on the boards and championing what they want to see and what their experiences is really, really important to make these resilient places in the long term.
Thanks. That's really, really helpful. Thank you. Chair, do I have the chance to open that up to the rest of the panel? Or yeah. Does anyone else have any reflections on engagement that would be great, Sarah.
Briefly,
Susan,
because
sorry.
I realise time is getting short now. I teach community and stakeholder engagement, actually, and so I'll try not to be too academic about this. And I used to be an engagement practitioner, actually, in a former life. But, I mean, we do have really good examples. I mentioned briefly inquiries by design, the charrette kind of process, and they've been used at scale, I mean, for whole kind of Newtown kind of approaches. And, of course, now that we've got, you know, and they're not about slowing things down, although I take your point about that, actually, James, because that often can happen when you've got these kind of formal structures where it's embedded in a planning process and can take many years. Not that I'm against those. But with a charrette, it's intended that you test the ideas live, and people have to talk to each other and find out what the different perspectives will be. And what you're working on is refining the ideas. You get these series of feedback loops, and you do it really quickly. You know, it's evidence-based as well. It's not just, I think, you know, that it should be like this. And so those EBDs do the similar thing. They can be really effective at helping to get to a better kind of outcome, better solution. And of course, you're doing some really interesting things in London already. I was thinking of some of the consultation and engagement work being done through, you know, for Old Oak Common, for example, linked to the master plan and other things, you know, and other places, you know, in the major renewal schemes around London. You know, you've already got a huge, I think, kind of set of things to work from, actually, that you've got a lot of expertise in this area. And I think while I accept there's a digital divide, online techniques we saw, you know, have seen increasingly can be really effective. So you would be using some kind of hybrid approach, and that would be, the intention would be to kind of open out and to extend the range of the consultation and to do it kind of, you know, quickly. So I think it's quite possible to be to learn from these, you know, various sources. And I was just thinking of the Scottish Charrette series, you know, a few years ago now, but they did a whole lot of really interesting work there using charrettes to develop new towns. And I think there's some things to learn from that, and also specific examples like Poundbury, who I mentioned earlier, and of course your own, you know, really fascinating work that's happening around London anyway at the moment.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Jen, did you want to?
If I may, I mean, because we were building in Milton Keynes almost entirely for people who weren't yet there, our engagement was twofold. Firstly, as soon as people arrived, we had a social development department represented at director level on our board, and I think we're the first place to have that, which had community workers working for it, that made sure that there were resources locally, both physical resources, financial resources and human skills that help those people to actually form relationships, form groups, actually find the resources they need. But we also did a lot of survey work, and this is long before the internet, so this was face-to-face form filling, to find out what they liked about the places they lived, what they didn't like, what they would have done differently. And we used that continuously during 25 years to try and make sure we improved and we learned as we went along from people's initial experience of living in the areas. So all of that was, if you like, after they'd arrived, because it was impossible for us to go. Most of our people were coming from housing need in London. How could we consult what they needed, other than knowing that they needed good homes, they needed jobs, they wanted schools nearby, they wanted parks, they wanted facilities. All of that we did. But then how they settled in and helping them settle in was where our focus was.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. And this will be the... Guy, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add a very quick thing that we do in France. Since the movement of extensions of towns is rapidly growing in France, what do mayors is that they organize trips to cities already being built with buses. And so we organize a one-day trip, and we propose to whoever wants to visit the city of Plessis-Robinson-Clamart, get in the bus, spend one day visiting the whole city, gets the idea, oh, we can build that for you in your city. Are you interested? And I can tell you this is super, super effective, because even if you have just 120 persons visiting the city, when they go back in their city, they said, oh, you can't believe how this city is so beautiful. We want the same. And so in one day, you've convinced everyone how to do it. So very, very effective tool. Of course, we use also, projections with internet, AI, everything. But visiting real cities, as you did, James, when you visited Zach Panorama, it's a very effective tool.
Thank you very much, Guy. Yeah, sometimes the old ways and the simple ways are the best, aren't they? The final question will be from myself. I think maybe we'll start with Guy and then come to panellists in the room. What would your final advice be to the government, the mayor and the councils in London regarding the two proposed new towns?
I'm going to answer to your question, but there's one thing we haven't talked about, and I will just say 2 words about it. It's about social mixity, because I think this is a very important thing to make them successful. What we do in all the new towns we're building in France is we have more or less 30% of social housing. I know the target for your new towns is 40%. We do 30%. And the way we do it is we build 2 private buildings and then 1 social housing, and then 2 private and then 1 social housing. Doing this way, it's very effective because we have a real social mixity. The kids going down from their buildings, they're playing together on the same green field. They're going to the same school. We do not do it the way we were doing like 50 years ago, building just a bigger area with 100% social housing and 1 school for this specific area. That was not working. And so I think one of the key success is about social mixity and do it the way I've just said. It's very, very important, I think. And in the first panel, some people were questioning, could we increase 40%, do more? My advice will be no, we should not do it, because I think the key success of the city is a real social mixity. If let's say you have 60% of social housing, this is not social mixity. It won't work. So I think 40% is good. Right? It's my point of view. And we need to really build real social mixity. It's very, very important. So to answer to your question, what are the key things to learn? I would say what I started again at the beginning, very clear vision. You need to have a very clear vision. And I think a clear vision on what is good urbanism, what is good architecture. This is absolutely key. And you need to learn about that. So this is the first thing. And the second thing, I think, is to capture the land value. I don't know the English system, but what I know is that in France, what makes it possible and successful is that we capture a big chunk of the land value. And I think this is, I don't know how to adapt the French system to the UK model, but it's absolutely key, because with all the value we capture, we're able to build everything and make it nice buildings, nice equipments, everything. So these will be the 2 first thing. And the third thing, I think, is one of the key things is that the leaders who are doing that, they need really to jump in that word of what we call new urbanism, learn about it. And if there was a book I would advise to every one of the committee to read, is Choice of Fate from Léon Krier. It's a very, very good book. Of course, I would recommend many others like Christopher Alexander, but it's too long to read. So if there was just one to read, I will say to all of you, read that book. You will get so many answers about what is good urbanism, what makes a city successful. That will be my advice. And take a bus, come to France and visit what we do. You could learn a lot too.
Thank you very much, Guy. Esther?
Yeah. Thank you. I think building on what Guy has just said, I mean, a lot has been said already today, but the 2 things that I'd like to add are, one is, it's kind of well known, and there's a lot out there around what high quality design is and architecture and its value, and that's well understood. But I think the thing that is really, really important actually is how you deliver that quality. From my experience at LLDC, we have learned a lot of lessons on that, particularly delivering through different types of mechanisms. So, for example, delivering directly or delivering through partnership, working particularly with the private sector. And critical to that is establishing and embedding the process as well as the outcomes in everything from the kind of procurements that you run through to the kind of contracts that you have in place with the developer. So, for example, I mean, there's so much to cover, but for example, quality and price and evaluations is quite an obvious one, but actually detailed selection criteria that enable the right outcomes that Guy's been talking about, being clear on the scope of and not leaving those things up to consultants, establishing like the processes that are expected around things like the engagement with local people once you've set that up, what you expect the kind of co-design to look like. You know, do you want local people to be paid for their time? So there's a whole spectrum of like establishing the process to get the quality that you know that you want. And I think on that, don't underestimate the time and the resource that's needed for that. And that time is needed on the kind of client side, on the public sector side. That goes back to the expertise point that Guy made. That expertise needs to be internal. You need to buy some in, but you do also need to have that internally. I guess just finally, there's also the GLA obviously has, as you've said several times, Susan, many people and many teams across the different organisations delivering on housing and delivering housing quality as their priority. And there's a lot of expertise in there, and the Kerslake review specifically asked for that to be shared, so for networks to be established. Those networks are in place, and those are kind of opportunities, I think, to you know, for you to be asking questions of those and asking for answers, and for those lessons to be learned and not kind of lost. Thank you.
Well, I want to end just basically by re-emphasising some points I've already made, because I think fundamentally it isn't a massive secret on how to build a new town. We've talked about development corporations in this session. We talked about land value capture, transit-oriented development, building the transport we need, and the need to build densely. I think there's a sort of wide consensus about that. If you look at all the various task forces and reports that come out about new towns, these are all sort of agreed upon things. But the point I want to just end on is really emphasising this urgency, this need to build quickly, and we should approach things with that sort of mindset about us, because, like I say, the housing crisis is here today. It's only going to get worse for, certainly generations that are younger than me. And I find it, the ultimate thing I find frustrating, and the reason I get very mad about this, is because I don't think I'm that old yet. I'm 38. I insist I'm not middle-aged yet. But every time we talk about big projects, whether it's new towns or infrastructure, it's always decades away. And it doesn't have to be. We can move faster if we want, and it's a political choice not to move faster. And that's the point I want to emphasise to the politicians, certainly to the London Assembly, to people in Westminster, if anyone's paying attention. We can build faster. We can build for future generations, but we can also build for ourselves if we want to. So I just want everyone to sort of, I don't think it is rocket science. I think we know broadly how to do this. It's just a case of approaching it with that real sense of urgency.
I broadly agree with all the things that have been said, although I would say I think there isn't an absolute agreement on what the answers are. I think we do have a kind of split, if you like, what we've sometimes, my colleagues and I have called the other new towns, which use the kind of approaches that Guy talked about of traditional housing, medium-rised, medium-density solutions, nature, walkability, human scale, active travel, as opposed to approaches which might focus on, kind of very high-rise solutions in the centre, and then fairly low density near the edge, which will be very car-focused. So I don't know that we absolutely have got there yet, but I'd like to think that kind of placemaking that I think, actually they're very obvious, those principles, and and that we ought to be trying to embed them in what we do in making places, and taking on all the points that have been made by my co-panellists in getting there.
I've got 3 things for the GLA and 1 for the government, I think. The 3 things for the GLA would be, firstly, put some effort into creating a strategic vision for both places. What kind of place do you want to create? What's its relationship going to be like with its surrounding parts of London. Don't spend too much time on that. Keep it strategic, but make sure you have got that developed. The second thing is select your delivery vehicle carefully from, I would say, what is a reasonable range of development corporations. Choose one of them, but choose the type that you think most fits the task that you're setting in each place. And it may be different in each of the two places. Thirdly, allow or require and enable that delivery vehicle to acquire control over all the development land. That way you can hold it accountable properly for getting on with the job at speed, to the right quality, to engage with the private sector and lay out the infrastructure and make sure it's done. Starting to talk about, well, we don't need to have all the land because some nice landowner owns half of it already, is a recipe for disaster and for confusion about why it went wrong and whose fault it was. So those are the three for the GLA. The fourth one for government, which I'm still not at all convinced it's done, is make sure that the law relating to the compensation that has to be paid when you acquire land will allow you to buy it at the lowest possible price. Now, it used to be simple. Back in the early Newtown days, it was existing use value. Then it became no scheme value, and then by case law, it became all sorts of complicated things. And my real nightmare for this next set of new towns is you'll think you're doing really well, you'll get right to the stage of setting them up, and then you'll spend about 10 years in the courts arguing about the compensation levels for the land you're buying. It'll cost an awful lot of money to take it through the courts. It'll undermine the confidence that governments have in the viability of the schemes they've been backing. It will make a lot of lawyers and surveyors very rich, thank you, but that's about the only positive thing that will come out of it. So please press government to convince you that the compensation that will need to be paid is now governed by laws that are clear and robust, because I don't believe it is. And I've not yet found a lawyer who can convince me it is.
Thank you all very much. We have now reached the end of the session. I would like to thank our guests for attending this meeting and for all your contributions today. The committee has a few more items of business to deal with. I kindly ask our guests in the chamber to remain seated for a moment while we go through our proceedings, which will not take long. Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion? Can I ask the committee to note the work programme for the 25-26 Assembly year? No. The next meeting of the Planning and Regeneration Committee will take place on the 11th of February 2026 at 2 p.m. in the Chamber, City Hall. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting.